All right, everybody, we are live in the newsroom here at Fox 5 DC. Welcome to Fox 5 Live on this Wednesday, July 18th. I have this baseball bat in my hand because the All-Star game was last night on Fox. Hopefully you caught it, Fox Sports. A bunch of us and our colleagues were down there watching the game, whether it was at one of the surrounding area bars or restaurants or in the game itself. I know a few people in here got to go inside, and what an awesome night for DC. There was so much excitement and fanfare surrounding the game. And yeah, this was one of the sort of swag items. Check it out, a mini bat that our assistant news director gave me. So I'm going to keep it, hopefully not mess anything up with it. But likely you came on our stream today to check out what is live and breaking in today's news. And we're going to have that all for you guys here today. Obviously, we're in the newsroom here on this Wednesday, tracking all of our live breaking news events. And right now, I see one of the videos coming in. We're about to get a pool feed of President Trump with his cabinet. We just got an announcement that is coming up very shortly. So what they did was those rooms are sort of made such that they only allow one or two smaller kind of cameras in there. And so we have the pool feed that or roll on it and then feed it back to all of us back here. So what they did is taped it. They're going to re-rack it. And we're going to play it out for you. Just a few moments ago, President Trump making some remarks with his cabinet. Now, this is all, of course, big in the news right now because of President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin and all the backlash surrounding that, and then his retraction of what he believed he said yesterday to kind of come back in the media and sort of retract what was said as he got some backlash on both sides of the aisle. So that story and a few other top stories of today now, we'll show you that, and then we'll make sure we break in with the live feed of President Trump, or rather the Today feed just a few moments ago, coming in shortly on our feed. So I'm looking around, making sure we don't miss anything for you. We're going to show you that story. Here's the update of President Trump swallowing his words from yesterday.
He has a cabinet meeting later today, but there is clearly a cleanup operation underway at the White House.
Realize that there is a need for some clarification.
Some need for clarification. That may have been an understatement as President Trump met with a group of congressional Republicans at the White House, all after a torrent of criticism following his press conference Monday with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this response to a question about whether it was true that Russia meddled in the 2016 election.
I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
And here was the president's fix.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative.
A double negative that, let's say, did not go over poorly with Democrats.
President Trump tried to squirm away from what he said yesterday. It's 24 hours too late and in the wrong place.
The Democrats now want hearings into what actually happened behind closed doors between Trump and Putin. There was even one call to question the U.S. translator. And Republican leaders were also talking tough on Russia.
I think the Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
As for the president, he is hoping that this correction is enough.
So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
And the president said that despite what he calls the fake news media, that his summit with Putin was a great success. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Realize that there is a need for some clarification.
Some need for clarification. That may be an understatement as President Trump met with a group of congressional Republicans at the White House, all after a torrent of criticism following his press conference Monday with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And this response to a question about whether it was true that Russia meddled in the 2016 election.
I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
And here was the president's fix.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative.
A double negative that, let's say, didn't go over well with Democrats.
President Trump tried to squirm away from what he said yesterday. It's 24 hours too late and in the wrong place.
Democrats now want hearings into what actually happened behind closed doors between Trump and Putin. There was even one call to question the U.S. translator. And Republican leaders were also talking tough on Russia.
I think the Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
As for the president, he's hoping that this correction is enough.
So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
I told everyone, okay, to fight, okay, not to defeat.
They were trapped in an underground cave for more than 2 weeks. And now all 12 boys and their soccer coach have left the hospital where they were being treated for dehydration and malnourishment. The boys addressing the media for the first time since being rescued, giving us our most detailed account so far of life inside the cave.
I was really afraid, okay, not to be able to return home.
We found the water coming off the rock upstairs where we can actually feed ourselves, and so we found some shelters to stay.
The boys say that at first they tried to dig their way out of the cave after realizing they'd become trapped by the rising water, and they're paying special tribute to a Thai Navy SEAL who died while laying down oxygen tanks along the rescue path, saying his sacrifice won't be forgotten. Doctors now say that other than a few minor infections, the team is in good shape. They're now headed home, where friends and family have been preparing for weeks, and say they'll take good care of the boys.
I feel very happy. Now they like my family.
If he wants anything, we'll buy it for him as a present. We promise that when he gets out. Whatever he wants, we'll do it.
Thai officials are now considering new security plans for the cave to ensure it remains off limits during the rainy season. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
New York City is known as the Big Apple, but Tuesday it was all about the watermelons.
Hi.
Meet Ashrita Furman, a man who holds more world records than anyone else. And now he has one more for slicing the most watermelons in half on his own stomach in 1 minute. Is he losing his rind?
Please don't try this at home, because it's a very sharp blade, and if you slip, you can easily cut an arm or a finger.
His team helping Furman succeed in the challenge by placing a gourd on his stomach. He then used a sharp sword to slice right through it. Furman had to cut 20 to achieve the Guinness World Record. And in 60 seconds, he split 26.
Hi.
When he was finished, he wasn't any worse for wear. Furman says a combination of aim and the right amount of strength prevents injury. But there were a few close calls.
I noticed at 1 or 2 points, it was getting very close to my arms.
You may be wondering, has this seedy stunt ever been attempted before? Furman actually came up with the concept, submitted it to Guinness, and they came up with the rules.
Well, I'm really thrilled. I mean, my first reaction is I'm relieved that I didn't kill myself, and the second is that I'm exhilarated, because it not only is a skillful record, but also it's something that I invented, and now it's something that's out there and other people can challenge it.
What became of the rinded remains? Well, they were donated to a local restaurant and used to make watermelon juice, of course, in New York. Jackie Ibanez, Fox News.
The next time you answer your hotel room in Vegas, a robot could be at the door. Their names are Fetch and Jet, fashioned after canine companions. The roving pods are meant to enhance the guest's stay at the Vidara Hotel and Spa.
The robot actually is very autonomous and moves seamlessly throughout the property. The technology trend obviously is very important. I mean, looking for innovative ways to, again, create guest experiences.
The robots run about 20 trips each a day, taking around 10 minutes to make their deliveries. They carry items like coffee, snacks, and toiletries from the market cafe downstairs.
Wi-Fi dependent, the animatrons weave in and out of crowds using exterior sensors, while an attendant tracks their movements on a mobile device. They travel up the elevator and ring the guest's room upon arrival. But experts say the trend might not have staying power.
I think the penetration of these robots hasn't quite sort of hit a peak at all in any way. And I think we're still sort of at a stage where the robots sort of seem to be more like a novelty than necessarily an essential part of the hotel sort of ecosystem.
Silicon Valley developer Savvy Oak has about 70 of them in 63 hotels worldwide as the trend is expanding, but Ting cautions their importance in the hospitality industry as a whole.
Nothing really replaces the sort of genuine human hospitality that you experience at a hotel, and a person who can really intuit, you know, how you might be feeling, or can anticipate your needs, or, you know, just help you feel at home even when you're on the roads.
The company says more features could be coming on the robots, like detecting dead Wi-Fi zones, picking up hotel room trash, and making jokes with guests. In Las Vegas, Andrew Kraft, Fox News.
Following President Trump's roundly criticized performance in Helsinki, Russian President Vladimir Putin told state media that he and President Trump had very substantive conversations. Though with no signed summit agreement, it's unclear what, if anything, the presidents agreed to beyond support for peace between Syria and Israel and vague promises of continued cooperation and dialogue. There are still major differences between the countries on Iran, Syria, sanctions, and NATO expansion.
For us, well, it's a direct and immediate threat for our national security. So, accordingly, moving this NATO infrastructure towards our borders would be a threat, and the reaction would be extremely negative.
Days before the summit, NATO did just that, formally inviting Macedonia to begin membership discussions, potentially becoming the 30th nation to join the international security alliance established to counter Russia.
There was no recognition of Crimea by the United States. There was no reneging of U.S. military and security commitments to Europe. And there was also no deal on Syria, which was rumored right in the lead up to the summit. So we saw no deliverables, no commitments. So in a very practical way, in a real way, nothing was lost or gained.
The U.S. and Russia already attempted a ceasefire in southwest Syria. Russia violated it and still backs the regime there as Bashar al-Assad restores control over more of the country. The Russian president pointed out Russia opposes the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement. The U.S. also maintains substantial sanctions against dozens of Russians, though analysts say a loss on optics for the United States could translate into foreign policy setbacks.
It gave the United States the appearance of weakness, which was unwarranted, and it gave Russia the appearance of strength, which was even more unwarranted.
Administration officials described yesterday's summit as the beginning of a process between the United States and Russia. As for the possibility of another meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin, the officials say they are still reviewing the discussions from yesterday and considering their next steps. At the State Department, Rich Edson, Fox News.
Inside this LA Fitness, a basketball game ended up being reffed by Loudoun County Sheriff's deputies. This man was there for it, and first to tell the world on Twitter Monday night. He says this guy called authorities on this guy.
No punches were thrown, nothing. It wasn't malicious, no hits to the face or anything like that.
He didn't want to use his name, but described what he witnessed. If you know basketball, he says the move in question was a pick.
Basically, you just stand here and maintain your ground. And he just ran up. He ran into him. He might not have seen him because no one told him the pick was coming. So he just ran into him, fell down kind of hard. I mean, that's basketball. You know, that's nothing you would call the police about. You know, his hands are, you know, down here.
The guy who fell had the gym receptionist call for help.
Sheriff's office. Hi, yes, I'm calling from LA Fitness at the Dulles Town Center, and a member got assaulted.
Based on this call,
does the victim need an ambulance, anything like that? No.
Deputies thought they were responding to something more serious. Another player posted this video.
The sheriff's office says in the end, neither man involved wanted to file a formal report. Perhaps most bizarre about all this, our witness says that after deputies left, both men went back on the court to finish the game.
Everyone kept playing. That's what's so bizarre about the whole situation. It's like, why did it have to be that serious?
He says he doesn't believe there was some bigger issue behind what happened.
Why, PB? You can tell it was strictly basketball. There was no racial undertones or anything like that.
And lastly, he says even if there had been real referees at the game,
There would have been no call. Even in the NBA as it is now, because people think, a lot of fouls and stuff are called now, it would not have been a foul. It would just, everyone had kept playing. Like, it wouldn't have even been an afterthought.
Are you on your phone or your tablet right now? Both? Okay, I want on both right now. Why? Because I want to talk to you, and we have company. And I need your passwords.
You are watching the moment a mom confronts her young daughter while she's streaming live on the popular app LiveMe.
We can go in my office.
The mom has police officers with her, and they're there to question her daughter about an inappropriate live stream she was in with a friend the day before. That's when both girls exposed themselves, not knowing the people making the request on the other end of the live stream were pedophiles, and thousands could have been watching.
You got the app LiveMe on there, right? So tell me, what's LiveMe?
The text log, much of it too explicit for TV, shows the pedophiles told the girl to pull her top up and perform a sexual act on her friend. They also told her to take off her pants, as well as show her private parts.
You know why we're here?
No.
Did you make a video yesterday?
Yeah.
The officers were alerted to the LiveMe stream by a group called Sheepdog Bloodhound.
This one's probably about 8 years old. This girl over here, maybe 10.
They're a group of volunteers from all around the world who started monitoring LiveMe as they try to report and prevent child exploitation.
The child had been online with a friend and inappropriate, showing herself, showing her body, basically doing what the predators had asked her to do.
Paul Irwin leads the group.
Irwin, Sheepdog Bloodhound.
Hello, this is Tony.
Hey, Tony.
And he gets tips from all over the world.
This person right here in his profile, DM me for eggplant emoji, banana emoji, add my Snapchat. Clearly not a good individual. He's following 3,010. It's almost all little girls.
Irwin tells Fox 11 that he is seeing a serious uptick in inappropriate behavior on LiveMe during these summer months, now that kids are out of school.
We don't want to have sex with each other, okay?
In most cases, shall we say more than 90%, the family have no idea what their youth are doing online.
As Fox 11 reported in May, LiveMe has been downloaded more than 90 million times. It shares the user's location and allows users to search for who is streaming near them.
Y'all are incredible.
We found countless streams of underage girls being solicited by pedophiles to perform sexual tasks.
Show my boobs and my no.
Some of the girls took their clothes off, others danced sexually. All while, in many cases, older men wrote perverted comments to them. We also found some of the streams were recorded and then posted on porn sites, where customers were directed straight to live streams or web captures of underage girls on LiveMe, with the links advertising that the girls are young jailbait who were secretly recorded without their knowledge. After our story aired, these new disclaimers began appearing on LiveMe streams, saying that sexual or violent content is strictly prohibited and that all violators will be banned. The company has refused repeated requests to go on camera, but tells us they're trying to crack down on users lying about their age and that they're recruiting volunteers to help monitor live streams for bad conduct. But experts say it's just not enough.
The problem is now it appears they've opened it up to allow the general public to come in and do the work that, quite frankly, that they should be paying for.
Dr. Lisa Stroman is a clinical psychologist who has worked with the FBI. She's also the director of the Digital Citizens Academy.
As a parent, there's absolutely no way I would allow my child on that platform.
She says LiveMe has to do more to stop misconduct on their platform. And she believes the video of the girl being confronted shows why parents have to be involved. That young girl was streaming live on the app when mom interrupts, with police officers present.
Hi. Can I see your phone, please?
She goes into another room with officers, who then begin interrogating her.
So tell us about the video where you expose yourself. And what happened?
Started doing that again.
You might have seen the video. We've seen the video and we heard. So people were chatting with you. They were asking you to take your shirt off.
The girl sits in stunned silence, looking like a deer in the headlights.
I just better start talking and get it out because I'm sure there's more.
Is that okay with you?
I'm happy with it.
The officers begin asking the girl about the app, and then they realize they are being streamed out live as they speak.
So what's live? Tell me about that.
It's like, you can
You log in right now, huh? So are we live streaming right now?
The stream is then cut off.
It was interesting to watch the video live, given that the mother in that situation, literally I felt kind of threw her under the bus and didn't take any responsibility, not being aware that legally her daughter was absolutely liable for distributing, creating child pornography.
Despite what happened, that girl's profile is still active, and Dr. Stroman says that's on mom.
One of the most interesting things I saw on the tape was that the mother was asking what the daughter's passwords were. So again, this is classically where we want parents to be the ones in charge.
Fox 11 spoke with a young girl who works with Sheepdog Bloodhound to catch predators on LiveMe. She had previously used the app since age 10. We're hiding her identity, and with her mom's permission, she explains how attention and virtual currency make the app so enticing to young girls.
We go live and we're just bored, and then we get no comments, but then the predators start coming in and they start enticing us, and that's when they give a gift, and that's when they're like, oh, they're like paying attention to me, so I'll do whatever they do, and I want those gifts.
It seems to me that there's this lack of understanding from this generation that they could get in trouble for any of this.
But they can, and they will.
Got a potential location on that child and identity.
So what's the
Hairbrush girl.
And that's why Irwin says his group has an uphill battle.
Because of the change of season and kids getting out of school, things are at an elevated level. Things are worse. Bad things are happening. They're happening often. We simply can't keep up.
So that's really quite an incredible investigation that our sister station Fox 11 in Los Angeles has been tracking for weeks on weeks. They've been sort of investigating that app on one's phone and kind of seeing where it takes them. And it's just a lot of stuff going on that a normal kind of civilian person wouldn't actually know is going on some of these teens' phones. So it's important to be aware of if perhaps you find yourself to be a parent of one of those people of those age or whatnot, just in general to be aware of that app. And they're going to continue to kind of follow that and stay on that investigation. One more interesting story of the day, and then we're going to take you over to another really cool rally this morning outside of the Capitol. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi led a rally to commemorate the 170th anniversary of the Women's Rights Convention, the Seneca Fall Convention in 1848. It's kind of hard to believe it's been 170 years, and a bunch of women were there to kind of talk about it and commemorate it, and we're going to show you that. And then also coming up, as you see, we have not forgotten about this. We're waiting on that pool feed from President Trump inside his cabinet meeting, and that should be coming up shortly for you. So let's go back over to this one more other top story, and then we'll switch it over to that rally from this morning, and then we'll be back in the newsroom with President Trump whenever that comes in.
Inside this maternity room, waiting and preparing for her firstborn to arrive, while her husband is deployed overseas. The ultra-running marathon athlete says she's no stranger to labor or pain, which is why the mom-to-be decided on a natural birth through midwifery.
And I think a big part of being an athlete is body awareness and listening to your body, and so that's something I've always tried to do really well with. And I think because I practice that, I'm able to push limits.
Nicole is now 30 weeks pregnant and says while she has no idea what to expect, she feels she's ready.
To me, it's like another physical feat. Like I said, it's another, not sport, but kind of just the challenge of it. So I think continuing that through childbirth, that's like another feat, right? Physical feat. Women have been doing it for years, and so I think it makes sense to stay true to myself.
Now, Banner Australia is offering MidWhite Births to patients. The program gives moms a home birth experience with the support of a medical team.
In certain cases, medications, of course, we know can have some side effects, can in certain cases cause harm. And so that what this really does is this empowers the patient that they can make informed decisions about what they think is best for their body and what is also best for their child.
I think that they leave this experience feeling very empowered as women, that they were able to, give birth to their baby, they're stronger and, happy.
So moms like Nicole can experience a healthy baby in the most natural way. In Phoenix, Carmen Blackwell, Fox 10 News.
Well, President Trump is trying to move on to some other business. He has a cabinet meeting later today, but there is clearly a cleanup operation underway at the White House.
Realize that there is a need for some clarification.
Some need for clarification. That may have been an understatement as President Trump met with a group of congressional Republicans at the White House, all after a torrent of criticism following his press conference Monday with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this response to a question about whether it was true that Russia meddled in the 2016 election.
I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
And here was the president's fix.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative.
A double negative that, let's say, did not go over poorly with Democrats.
President Trump tried to squirm away from what he said yesterday. It's 24 hours too late and in the wrong place.
The Democrats now want hearings into what actually happened behind closed doors between Trump and Putin. There was even one call to question the U.S. translator. And Republican leaders were also talking tough on Russia.
I think the Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
As for the president, he is hoping that this correction is enough.
So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
And the president said that despite what he calls the fake news media, that his summit with Putin was a great success. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Realize that there is a need.
So it's a recap of yesterday's retraction from President Trump in anticipation of what's coming next, and that is this meeting with his cabinet. We're seeing that on our screen right now. It's sort of a still shot. They're re-racking that tape. Once we have that, we're going to bring that to you. And again, it won't exactly be live. It'll be having been taped sort of a few moments ago. They'll rewind it, re-rack it, and we'll play that out for you. And we'll kind of break in with that when it does come down. So we'll flash over to this morning's event. I think this was actually pretty interesting. This rally, it's sort of a women's rights press conference rally outside of the Capitol this morning, spearheaded by Nancy Pelosi and a lot of other women lawmakers involved. So let's jump over there, and then we're going to break in whenever this tape comes down.
The energy economy that you referenced.
To ensure that we rise from 22% of this government. Only 22% of our Congress are represented by women. We will continue to fight. When it comes to health care, I feel that any American that thinks it's okay for a room full of men to close the door and make decisions about women's health care needs to be energized. I am so excited to stand here on the shoulders of my 4 mothers who had the courage and the tenacity to fight so that we can have the right to vote. I'm going to bring up our first speaker, and that will be, is Lois Frankel here? I'm going to bring up Lois Frankel, who is the chair of the Democratic Working Women's Group. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Vice Chair of the Democratic Working.
Shouldn't be happy about it because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you believe Putin when he says he didn't meddle in the election? We're finished here. Let's go. Make it play out. We're finished. Let's go.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any intel reports that say?
Come on, keep moving, let's go.
Sorry.
Just trying not to.
Gathered at Seneca Fall Convention to declare that all women and men are created equal and demand that the women get the right to vote. It took 70 long years to get that ratification, and then many more struggles for women to make economic and educational gains, and also gain that all-important reproductive freedom. And now, President Trump and Republicans want to end the freedoms granted under Roe v. Wade and take us back to the days of coat hanger medicine. We are learning a painful lesson that elections matter. Our foremothers knew this, and that's why they fought tirelessly for the vote. So my message today to the women of this country, in the spirit of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, fight back, because we must not go back. And next, I'm going to bring up Judy Chu, Chair of the Congressional Asian and Pacific American Caucus.
Thank you. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. With the addition of those two simple words, and women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton started a revolution in Seneca Falls 170 years ago. At that time, women in America, the land of the free, were prevented from inheriting property, signing contracts, serving on a jury, and prevented from voting. Women were very much second-class citizens, but the 200 women who gathered in Seneca Falls dared to believe that they could change.
Well, thank you very much for being here. At today's cabinet meeting, I've just returned from a very historic trip to Europe where we've made incredible progress toward achieving greater peace, security, and prosperity for America, for our allies, and in fact, for the entire world. The meetings with NATO, the United Kingdom, and with Russia were a tremendous success, and I think you will see that, and it'll play out over a period of years, frankly, but they were a tremendous success. At home, our economy is thriving and booming like I would say never before. People are looking and they're trying to find times, and there's never been a time like this. We've created more than 3.6 million jobs since the election. We are in the longest positive job growth streak in history, in the history of our country, or at least on record. Unemployment has fallen for every demographic group, every single group. African American unemployment has reached its lowest levels by far in history. Hispanic unemployment is at its lowest levels in history. Asian unemployment is at its lowest level in history. Women's unemployment is at the lowest level in 65 years. So those are tremendous numbers. The consumer and business optimism polls have reached the all-time highs, highest number ever recorded. In today's meeting, we will focus on a very important issue, workforce training, as part of our commitment to buy American, hire American, and frankly, to make America great again. I'm going to pretty soon have to take that word again out because we are moving at a level that few people would have ever thought possible, including job numbers and growth. And some big numbers have come out already, and I guess numbers will be coming out over the coming weeks, and I would expect they would be very, very good. I always talked about growth. Growth solves a lot of difficulties, a lot of problems, and you see that happening. We will hear from Ivanka, from Secretary Acosta, Secretary Ross, Secretary DeVos, and Administrator McMahon about important actions we're taking in partnership with the private sector and state and local governments to expand vocational education, career and technical training, and on-the-job training. And the reason we're doing this is that so many companies are moving back to the United States like nobody ever thought possible. And we need people. We need trained people. We need people that know trades. And we're starting a very intensive program of training people so that when these companies, these great companies, come back into the country, many of them left years ago, they're coming back now because of what we're doing. Whether it be the regulations or the massive tax cuts, they're coming back, and it means jobs. And that's why the unemployment numbers are so good. And you've seen nothing yet. So we need people to really be able to take these jobs. That will have a positive impact even on immigration. We need people to come in on a merit basis because we have to be able to provide jobs. We have to be able to provide the people that are running these massive companies with labor. So tomorrow I'll be making a big announcement about workforce training initiatives, which aims to give every American citizen an opportunity to achieve their American dream. I want to have choice, just like we have now with the veterans all approved, which nobody thought would be possible. The vets now, instead of standing in line for 2 weeks or 1 week or 3 months, they can go out and see a doctor, and we pay for it. And it turns out to be much less expensive, and they are loving it. Nobody thought it was possible to get that. So I want choice for workers so that if they don't like their job, they can go get another job, and they'll find one that they really love, and they'll love getting up in the morning and going to work. So that's what we're working on. Tremendous numbers of companies are coming back into our country. Tremendous dollars are coming back. We have hundreds of billions of dollars are pouring back into our country because of our tax cuts and reform. We're allowing these big companies that have billions of dollars offshore to bring that money back into our country. Before we had the bill passed on tax cuts and reform, it was virtually impossible to get money brought back into our country. Now you look at Apple, I believe they're bringing in about $250 billion, and they're putting that to work in the United States. Other companies are likewise bringing in billions and billions of dollars. So we've never seen anything like this before. I think ultimately the number could be $4 trillion. So these are not numbers that anybody has ever even heard of or would ever be familiar with, because it never happened before. But it's happening under the Trump administration. And with that, I'd like my daughter Ivanka to start. This has been a very important issue, women's issue and this issue, two issue. Any woman's issue is very important to Ivanka, and the issue of workplace employment and jobs and training has been really at the top of her list. So, Ivanka, could you say a few words, please?
Absolutely. And maybe I'll move over here so you don't have to look behind.
I'll ask the press, would you like to stay or would you like to leave? I'm shocked to hear that.
Well, thank you, President, and thanks to the Trump administration's pro-growth policies, we see that the economy is roaring. Unprecedented deregulation and tax cuts have been a central component to the success of this administration's economic agenda. GDP growth last year surpassed all expectations. The unemployment rate currently sits at just 4%, and 3.7 million jobs have been added since the election in November 2016. America's economic future is bright. Last month alone, 600,000 additional Americans entered or re-entered the workforce. And there are millions of prime-aged Americans poised to join the workforce now that there are new and better jobs available. More people who have been discouraged and sitting on the sidelines are now throwing their hat back into the ring and deciding to look for a job. Our strong economy has brought a long-standing critical issue to the forefront. Employers are having trouble finding enough workers with the right skills. Job openings exceed the number of unemployed people in our country for the first time in recorded history. As we know, a robust labor market is great for the American worker. Wages are finally beginning to rise after almost a decade of stagnation, and people are coming off the sidelines and back into high-demand fields. However, current public investment in education and skills is de minimis after the age of 25, not reflecting an evolving economy in which workers must continually update their skills in response to the changing employer needs and an increasingly digital economy. Further, while employers themselves typically invest substantially in training for college-educated workers, they invest only half of that in workers with just a high school degree. This is beginning to change, and this administration is seeking to catalyze and accelerate private sector commitment to all of our workers. Already, the administration has taken critical steps to ensure all Americans have a pathway to good-paying jobs, and tomorrow, President Trump will take another important step to prioritize and expand vocational educations so that we can create and fill American jobs with American workers. President Trump will sign an executive order to establish the National Council for the American Worker and a separate advisory board. The council will work to develop a national workforce strategy and bring together cabinet-level leadership to build upon the successful work already being done and to further amplify that. Secretary DeVos has been working very hard over the last 17 months to ensure that the skills being taught in our classrooms align with those in demand in the modern economy. Secretary Acosta has been working to expand apprenticeship and to increase access to vocational education. Secretaries Mattis and Acting Secretary Wilkie have shown tremendous leadership in working to help transition our military service members into the workforce at the time their service draws to a close. Director Mulvaney and his team at OMB have put forward an exciting and ambitious plan to merge the Departments of Education and Labor so that we can holistically think about the role of education and the workforce. And Administrator McMahon has been traveling around the country and listening to the needs of small business, which now, for the first time in a very long time, now that deregulation has occurred and tax cuts have occurred, are citing the lack of skilled labor as their #1 constraint to growth. In addition to this U.S. Government Council, an advisory board co-chaired by Secretary Ross, thank you, Secretary, will bring together some of the most prominent employers and the country's largest employers to create public-private partnerships and develop recommendations for the implementation of this national workforce strategy. Recognizing that the American workforce is our country's greatest national asset, tomorrow President Trump will call upon the private sector and industry leaders to do their part and invest in the advancement in our current and future workforce. We are asking them to sign a pledge to the American worker, and commit to expanding apprenticeships, increase on-the-job training, and providing Americans from high school to those near retirement with concrete opportunities and to obtain the skills that will enable them to contribute to the economy and provide for themselves and their families. We'll also continue this campaign, and Secretary Ross and I will continue to engage the private sector to have more and more people sign this pledge and affirm their support. Whether it's opportunities for high school students to learn the skills to go straight into a job and avoid incurring student debt, or a mid to late career worker who needs to be retrained because their job is at risk of being lost to automation. We have to be thinking about the whole spectrum as we think about lifelong learning, and we need to engage the private sector to be our partner in that. These are real jobs, and these are new opportunities for growth, and we're confident that industry will partner with us to accomplish our goals of filling all vacant jobs with qualified workers. Following this launch of this initiative, we'll continue to press these companies, but also we'll work with governors and ensure that as the president visits states across the country, that they are mobilizing their largest employers to also sign the pledge and affirm their commitment to the American worker. I look forward to working with each of you in this room and the private sector to ensure that Americans are all provided with opportunities to thrive in this booming economy. I'd also like to thank the great team at DPC, Kara, Andrew Bremberg, for their help, Chris Liddell, And of course, the Vice President, who's been such a champion on this issue during his time as governor of Indiana, and has implemented so many great workforce training programs in his state. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you, President Trump, for enabling us to really develop this holistic solution and empower every American worker with the opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Wow. So if that were Ivanka Smith, the press would say, that was totally brilliant. We've never seen anything like that. As Ivanka Trump, they'll say, oh, she was okay. That was great. That was really great. Unbelievable. I just wanted to tell you that we have had very good sessions with Mexico and with the new president of Mexico, who won overwhelmingly. And we're doing very well on our trade agreement. So we'll see what happens. We may do separately with Mexico, and we'll negotiate with Canada at a later time. But we're having very good discussions with Mexico. On July 25th, the leaders of the European Union will be coming to see us at the White House. And as you know, I've made no bones about it. They have massive trade barriers where our farmers can't sell there for the most part. They have other barriers on cars and lots of other things, even medical equipment, where it's very, very difficult to sell into the European Union. And they're going to be coming on July 25th to negotiate with us. We said if we don't negotiate something fair, then we have tremendous retribution, which we don't want to use, but we have tremendous powers. We have to. Including cars. Cars is the big one. And you know what we're talking about with respect to cars and tariffs on cars. And they know better than you do. They know better than all of us do what that means. So they're going to come and they're going to try and negotiate a deal. We have very good relationships with Jean-Claude and Donald, all of them. But they're going to be coming to the White House on July 25th. So that'll be very interesting to see what happens. But Mexico's coming along very well. We've had really, really good discussions with them, and I think we can say that's pretty far advanced. It's getting closer all the time. Okay. With that, I'd like to ask Secretary Acosta to take over the stage and say a few words, Mr. Secretary. And you're doing a fantastic job, by the way, in case nobody's told you that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, as you mentioned, we have a tremendous, tremendous economy. Record low unemployment. The Federal Reserve is estimating it's going to go even lower. And this is the first time since we've kept the data that we have more open jobs than job seekers. And so we've been implementing the apprenticeships since your election. There have been 300,000 new apprenticeships created. And I think this year we will see commitments for at least 300,000 additional apprenticeships. We are working on prisoner reentry initiatives. When an individual leaves prison, the best that we could do for the individual, the best that we can do for society is help them find a job. And we're working very diligently on prisoner reentry initiatives. We're addressing the opioid crisis by incorporating job training and education within opioid centers. So when someone leaves treatment, they're ready for a job. And we're also looking at delicensing initiatives. The states have various occupational licenses, and that's often a barrier to entry. You signed the executive order on military spouses, and that executive order took important steps to make it easier for military spouses to find jobs as the service person moves from base to base. We're working with the Department of Defense. More generally, state occupational licenses are a barrier to entry. We have more than 1 million individuals who could be working right now, who, according to Federal Reserve studies, are not in the workforce because of state occupational licenses, and that's a problem. And so we're working very aggressively to bring more individuals into the workforce. This month saw the first uptick in the unemployment rate, and it's important to highlight the reason why. More people found jobs, but for the first time, we had a record number of people coming off the sidelines and saying, we want jobs too. And so 601,000 Americans said, we are now ready to look for a job. And that is great news because people are starting to re-engage and look for jobs, and that's what this economy needs. And so I think this initiative is going to build on the work we've all been doing, but bring us all together in a very unified way. So,
well, that's really fantastic. Could you maybe discuss for just a moment, people coming out of prisons over the years have just been absolutely, they've had such a problem getting jobs. And now for the first time, maybe ever, and to a large extent, it's because of the job we've done in creating all of this enthusiasm in the great economy. People are hiring people out of prison, and they're loving it. I'm hearing from, in one case, a friend of mine hired 10 people. And of the 10 people, he didn't give me the exact number, but I will tell you, he said these are incredible people. And it's all because of the economy that he did it, because he was having a hard time getting somebody. So would you explain a little bit about what's going on there? Because it's such a big topic and it affects so many people. And they have that aura that people did not like. And all of a sudden, for the first time really, people coming out of prison are able to get jobs and really have a very productive time for them and their families. So you might want to explain that.
That's right, Mr. President. I was out in Las Vegas about 3 weeks ago. I was visiting with John Ponder, who spoke in the Rose Garden here, who runs Prisoners for Hope, a reentry program. And he and his program goes into the prisons and works with individuals in cooperation with the prison system and the district attorney to provide skills and education before someone leaves the prison. And so when they leave prison, they have a number of businesses that are working with this program that are ready to hire them. And I spoke to the businesses that were there, and the businesses said, we hire these individuals because they are great employees, because they've been in the prison system, they don't want to go back, and they're incredibly dedicated. And as impressive, they had some of the individuals who had been through the program, who'd been in prison and now had jobs. And they said, when we take a job, we're taking not just for us, but we're taking it for those that are coming behind us. Because if we mess up, if we don't do a good job, we are costing not just our own job, but the jobs of all those others, because the employer may not hire other former prisoners. And I thought that acceptance of responsibility by those former inmates, that it was not just for them, but for future inmates needing jobs, spoke to the quality of that one program and spoke to the reason that so many employers in this program were successfully hiring. I looked at the metrics of this program, and the metrics, the employment rate for that program was higher than a lot of colleges. And that really says a lot about how successful many of these programs can be.
Well, there's never been a time like this for people coming out of prison getting jobs. There's never been anything close. And so the economy is turning out to be our best friend. So it's really good. Now, did you ever have so many cameras shooting you from the back? And I'm watching you and I'm saying, thank goodness he's got a beautiful head of hair.
And a little spot.
You did a great job, and you're doing a great job, and we appreciate it. Secretary Ross?
Thank you, Mr. President. The President's tax cuts and regulatory reforms are creating a new wave of growth in our advanced manufacturing and technology industries, along with demand for thousands of skilled workers. Our strengthening economy is a godsend for many millions of Americans who want to be part of the workforce and who now have the opportunity to participate productively in our economy. The lack of adequately trained workers is a major issue for American employers, and it is being addressed by this new council, of which I'm most honored to be a co-chair with Ivanka Trump, Secretary Acosta, and Andrew Bremberg. Since November 2016, 876,000 new jobs have been created in industries that produce goods, including 411,000 construction jobs, 374,000 manufacturing, and 91,000 mining. This past June alone, 53,000 new jobs were created in those industries, including 36,000 in manufacturing. These sectors produce the wealth, the technological innovation, and high-paying jobs needed for a modern industrial economy. It's imperative that we keep this momentum going. For example, Foxconn broke ground last month on a $10 billion factory in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. They'll employ 13,000 workers making state-of-the-art LCD screens. Foxconn and the hundreds of other companies that are expanding will need thousands of skilled workers adept at digital technologies, not only on the factory floor, but throughout the entire business enterprise. They will also need staff at the highest end of the skills spectrum, and we don't have enough of them. In 2016, there were 4,000 fewer full-time American STEM graduate students than there were in 2009. But over the same period, the number of foreign full-time STEM graduate students has increased by almost 70,000, and they mostly return to their home country after they finish their education. The shortage of the most highly trained technologists and engineers is both an economic and a national security issue. One of the biggest risks our employers and our military contractors face is having foreign nationals steal their important intellectual property and provide it to overseas governments. Just last week, Apple filed criminal charges against one of its former Chinese employees for stealing IP about the company's autonomous vehicle development program. That engineer is accused of providing trade secrets to Apple's principal competitor in China, X Motors. Training thousands more Americans for these sophisticated engineering jobs would substantially reduce such risks. But the burden of filling skills gap is falling directly on employers. Organizations with more than 100 employees spent $91 billion on worker training last year, almost 30% more than in 2016, and about 0.5% of our total economy. These numbers echo what we experienced on the task force on apprenticeship expansion. That task force accomplished a great deal, as you heard from Secretary Acosta, outlining key reforms the Department of Labor is making to the apprenticeship system. President Trump's new executive order now creates the National Council for American Workers to look at systematic issues that span our entire education and training system. It also establishes a new American Workforce Policy Advisory Board to be housed at the Department of Commerce. We will raise awareness of the job opportunities that are available for skilled American workers. We will recognize the companies and organizations that are successfully closing the skills gap. Look forward to chairing this new council with Secretary Acosta, Andrew Bremberg, and Ivanka Trump, and working with all the members of the council and with the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. That's very good. I thought I'd ask Secretary of State Pompeo to give us a little talk on some of our most recent activities, and maybe you could also touch on North Korea just for a couple of minutes. Mike, if you don't mind.
I'll do that, Mr. President. Maybe I'll start there on North Korea.
Fine.
So I traveled to Pyongyang for the third time. We made progress on some issues. There's a lot of work to do. It may take some time to get where we need to go, but all of this will be taking place against the backdrop of continued enforcement of the existing sanctions. The North Koreans reaffirmed their commitment to denuclearize. We're making progress along the border to get the return of remains, a very important issue for those families. We think in the next couple of weeks we'll have the first remains returned. That's the commitment. So progress certainly being made there. Still a fair amount of work to do. but a very hopeful place that we find ourselves with making this strategic change for North Korea and giving them an opportunity for a brighter future for their people. Mr. President, I've turned to the trip to NATO when I was with you in Brussels. I've known this NATO issue since I was a young soldier. It's been a while. And this is the first time I have seen the leaders of NATO understand fully the responsibility they have to make sure that they spend the money they need to protect themselves from the threat from Russia. The President, as everyone knows, made clear this obligation. He made clear our continued commitment to support them, but also the need for appropriate burden sharing. And we saw real progress. I had my counterparts, foreign ministers and heads of state, say to me they take this obligation seriously. They understand President Trump's view of this and the fact that their continued increase in their defense spending will make their country safer and make NATO stronger. So I think a fantastic outcome from the day and a half that we all spent there, led by the President in Brussels. I then departed your trip and went to Mexico City, led a delegation along with Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Nielsen, and Jared. We met with President Peña Nieto and the incoming President López Obrador. And again, there are many issues on our plate. We made clear to them that the migration issue must be resolved, that we need to have strong borders. We talked to them about trade, and there'll be more, I think, in the coming days to talk about the progress we're making on trying to resolve the issues on NAFTA. I'm very hopeful there. We talked about all the other issues between our two countries and really set the tone that followed the President's conversation with the President-elect just shortly after the ballots were counted in Mexico. It was really remarkable to see the Mexican government transition in a way that demonstrated democracy. No protests in the streets. It was a compliment both President Peña Nieto and President Obrador for conducting an election in the way that they did with respect. And then traveled to join the President in Helsinki. Had the chance to meet with my counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, and the President's discussion with President Putin set the conditions where we can find overlapping space. Counterterrorism, the Russians on the treaties that they're in violation of, a place where we can now begin to have important dialogues to put that relationship in a place where we reduce the risk to the United States from threats from Russia. So I think overall a very positive set of meetings we've had over the last 10 days, Mr. President.
Great job, Mike. Thank you very much. Betsy, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Back to the issue of workforce development, and thank you for your commitment to leading opportunity for all American workers. As we know, when we look at our K-12 system and those young people coming up, our country has fallen behind our international competitors. Today, in our PISA scores, we are 23rd in reading, 25th in science, and 40th in math. We have a significant opportunity to improve things for young people, and there's essentially a fundamental disconnect between education today and the preparation of our young people and today's economy and the opportunities there. What we're doing and what we're working toward from a higher ed perspective is working with Congress to authorize short-term Pell Grants that can be used for some of the programs that Secretary Acosta has alluded to. Today there are fewer and fewer traditional students pursuing higher education. We need to acknowledge that. We also need to acknowledge that there are many more innovative ways to provide education opportunities to students. And so we are working on reforming accreditation and regulations that stifle innovation and creativity when it comes to higher education. We are deploying the $200 million that you have suggested being invested in STEM education. And the competitive program will be up and running this fall. We are working closely with Congress and with Secretary Acosta to reauthorize the Perkins Act, which will again provide more opportunities to access these opportunities both in high school, as early as high school, and then into higher ed. We also are working to support the proposed merger between the Departments of Labor and Education, knowing that our future really depends on a nation that is prepared, people that are prepared for the opportunities that are not only here today, but that will be with us tomorrow. And so I look forward to working with my fellow cabinet members to pursue these opportunities and options.
Thank you very much, Betsy. Secretary Azar, could you maybe just spend a little time on talking about what we're doing about drug pricing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President. So we, of course, last year approved a record number of generic drugs, saving consumers over $8 billion to the system so far. We also changed how we pay for drugs, reducing out-of-pocket expenditures for seniors by $320 million a year for our senior citizens. We had a whole suite of legislative proposals that we are waiting on Congress to enact that would reform our senior drug discount program, to reduce out-of-pocket spending, and to put more of the burden on the middlemen who run those programs. We have our blueprint for prescription drug pricing that we rolled out a couple of months ago. We just closed the comment period on that a couple of days ago, so we've received over 3,000 comments. We want to go into this as a complex area. We're talking about the complete restructuring and reform of $400 billion of the American economy. President Trump's doing it the right way, which is seeking input from experts. We got that input. We are right now, over the next several weeks, going to be rolling out several major initiatives as part of the drug pricing plan. Last week, we already announced that we will be reducing what we pay for new drugs in the senior drug program. When new drugs come on the market, reducing the amount that we pay for those already. We yesterday announced a major reform of our over-the-counter drug program so that every citizen can get drugs cheaper and without a prescription. This morning, we rolled out our biosimilars strategy. So that's to create a generic-like market for these high-cost biologic products. So that, Commissioner Gottlieb rolled out just this morning. And then over the next several days, we've got a whole suite of actions coming. Which I will not give the media the benefit of until it comes out.
That's great. And Pfizer, as you know, had a major drug price increase, and we spoke to them, and I have great respect for the company and for its leader, and they rolled it back to zero. And we very much appreciate what Pfizer did. We didn't like the increase, but we liked what they did. They responded properly, so we appreciate that very much. Linda McMahon, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Clearly, to reiterate part of what's been said this morning, the tax cuts, regulatory rollback have clearly created a boom in our economy. Small businesses are growing, but when I travel around the country and listen to these small businesses, I hear also about the lack of skilled workers for them. And if you can expect, respect the position of small businesses, as big businesses grow, as they're raising wages, as they're making better benefits, not only to attract perhaps workers from other big businesses to come and work for them, the small business guy gets crushed a little bit because he can't compete with that increase in wages and the increase in benefits. So how are we going to help our small businesses? And as you've said many times, small businesses are big business. 30 million of them of our country. They're the backbone of the economy. So what SBA is helping to focus on is the training of a skilled workforce. And we're going to put together a nationwide plan for helping support incubators around the country and accelerators. Because they really, and maker spaces, they are doing incredible jobs of training workforce coming out. And so as we go into these incubators, small businesses are already growing there. How do we take them from that position, putting them into the workforce? They are actually providing then more and more of the skilled workers. So I think it's going to be a great plan to coordinate that on a nationwide basis through our incubators. I've seen it working, and I've also seen a lot of what's been discussed today about the apprenticeships and the programs that Betsy's been working on with education. I was actually in Charleston, West Virginia yesterday, and I was touring a small business, Alpha Technologies, but they are located on a campus of Bridgeway Community and Technical College. On that campus, one whole area of technical innovation is being sponsored by one of the local manufacturers. And when you go in, all of the equipment that's in that training program at the community college is being provided by the business. The workers come and spend 2 days on campus, 3 days at the company. They're earning about $40,000 through the whole period of being in school. So they're graduating with the skill that company needs, and they can move right from the community college right into the business. And I think that's the kind of program that we're going to see fostering, because it is that calibration that we're looking for, so that businesses get the kind of skilled worker they need by the public-private partnership. So all in all, it's such a good story everywhere, and I keep hearing, many thanks for the tax cuts, regulatory rollback, because it is absolutely energizing what's going on.
So Linda McMahon has done an incredible job, and I have to say, because I've known her and her husband Vince for a long time, they built a great business, and Linda was a very big part of it. For those of you that don't know, I know she was a very, very big part of it. So thank you for what you're doing a fantastic job. Ben Carson, say a few words about HUD, please.
Well, one of the big initiatives that's been going on recently is that we put together a Section 3 task force. Section 3 of the Fair Housing Act says that if you're receiving HUD funding, there's an obligation to hire, train, or give contracts to the low-income people in that area. People have found all kinds of reasons to get around it, but we've almost finished reformulating it so that we remove a lot of the barriers that disincentivize people from utilizing it. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. And also with the Envision Centers, we're going to be gathering the information about all of the apprenticeship programs and training programs, so that when somebody comes in, they're not confused. We'll have people who will help shepherd them, because we have a tremendous workforce out there, just waiting to be trained. And if we make it available to them, I think a lot of them will take advantage of it.
Thank you, Ben. Very appreciated. If I could ask, because it's very much in the news, Sonny Perdue, Secretary of Agriculture. I love the farmers, and we're breaking down barriers. One of the things I'm doing, as you know, with these trade deals that have been so unfair to our farmers and to our workers and to our companies from other countries. We're talking about it all the time, and we're breaking down barriers so that our farmers can sell their goods to other countries like they sell their goods to us. And one of the examples is Canada. They charge us on dairy products 275% tariff. At 275%, it's just not appropriate, it's not fair. And there's a big imbalance, even though a lot of people don't think there is. But there is a big imbalance between Canada and the United States in terms of surplus and deficit. But perhaps you could talk a little bit about the farmer, and I think they understand exactly what we're doing, and we're doing it as rapidly as possible, and we're taking some strong measures. But it's not fair when, I won't mention specific countries, but you know the ones I'm talking about, when certain countries have barriers that make it impossible for our farmers to sell into those countries, and yet they sell all sorts of products into ours unrestricted. Very unfair. Sonny?
Your farmers in America, Mr. President, understand that you're taking this fight on their behalf. I used a metaphor yesterday. It's a little bit like weight loss. It's a little painful in the meantime, but they're looking forward to being a winning later on. So I think they understand that. Obviously, you may not name those countries, but you've talked about in the past the EU and China playing very unfairly with the non-tariff barriers they've had in place for many years. In many ways, and our patriot farmers understand that you're the first one to attack this. They're very anxiously awaiting the wins, and we hope that the deal with Mexico and then Canada can come along very quickly behind that. But they're with you. They're hurting actually economically. They are strong American values, and they believe that you're an American first president, and they want to be with you. We just need to help their pocketbooks.
Well, I am, and I will say that if you look at soybeans, I looked at a chart the other day that came out recently. just prior to the election. 5 years before that, soybeans have been cut in half price-wise. Now, I've only been here for a little more than a year and a half with Mike, but I will tell you soybean is way down over a 5-year period prior to the election. So something has to be done. And you know that over a 15-year period, pricing and farms and everything else has been very much trending down. So we're going to straighten that out, and they have to bear with us, but they are. They're great American patriots, and they really are something. They're very special people. Mike, would you like to say something? Mike Pence?
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I told you yesterday, good to have you back after a successful week of international engagement. It should come as no surprise to the American people that you are right back here at the White House focusing on American jobs. And I truly believe that we're here in a large measure because of the connection that you made to working Americans. And I truly do believe that this government-wide initiative that you will set into motion tomorrow with the Council for American Workers, bringing together a broad range of cabinet agencies, is a reflection of the promises that we made to working Americans. It is remarkable to think that we're at a time where there are more job openings in America than there are people looking for jobs. But the efforts that are reflected here, I think, demonstrate that you're a president. This is an administration that believes that all honest work is honorable. I've seen the way you interact with working Americans across this country. You love people that know how to make things and grow things. And this commitment to skills education, to vocational education, I think is a reflection of that. And I'm very excited to be working with you on it. Having had the experience of working in this area a bit when I was governor of Indiana, I see how enthusiastic the American people are for this. I especially want to thank Ivanka Trump for her work in this area, bringing together all these various agencies and all the cabinet members who are working so much. I truly do believe that this will be a centerpiece and a legacy long after we finish our work here that will pay dividends for prosperity for the American people.
I think so, Mike. I do think so. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S.? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank you very
let's
much.
go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case? Let's go. We're finished here.
Senator Schumer said you would walk the back.
Press, let's go.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Make your way out. Can you just
We're doing very well. We are doing very well, and we're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia. And there's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia. All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done, look at sanctions, look at ambassadors not there, look, unfortunately, at what happened in Syria recently. And I think President Putin knows that better than anybody, certainly a lot better than the media. He understands it, and he's not happy about it. And he shouldn't be happy about it, because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you believe Putin when he says he didn't win that in the election?
We're finished here. Let's go. Make your way out. We're finished. Let's go.
Thank you very much.
Do you have any intel reports that say?
Come on, keep moving. Let's go.
Sorry.
All right, guys, so that was the entirety of President Trump's cabinet meeting this morning. I hope that the mic situation worked out. I know the audio was kind of tricky for some of you. We tried to kind of effort that on the best we could on our end. But that was just moments ago. They taped it. They played it back for us. Words from President Trump himself, his daughter Ivanka, and then Secretary of State Pompeo taking the mic for a little bit of it as well, and that was it in its entirety. So if you missed any of that or you jumped on kind of halfway through, just scroll the feedback. You can see more of that on our tape here. But we are live here in the newsroom at Fox 5 DC in Washington, DC. Thank you for joining us on our stream. We're hanging out here looking for all the latest breaking news, any live videos that we have coming in right now. Quick bump shot outside of the District Federal Court here in DC. This is the podium shot right here for what's going to be some sort of announcement, press conference on that case with that woman, Maria Butina. You may have heard about this case. We've been talking about it here on Fox 5 for a little bit now. She is a Russian national, allegedly tied to a top Russian official, and has been charged in federal court with conspiracy to act as an agent of Russia. So there's going to be an update on this coming up shortly. And then right now, concurrently, also, guys, we have a shot of President Trump arriving. Here it is at Joint Base Andrews. That's a live look at that chopper shot right there, Marine One. Later on today, around the 2 o'clock hour Eastern time, we are supposed to be getting in the White House press briefing, which will be quite interesting. We haven't had one of those live for a while, so we'll be bringing that live to our stream as well. So stay on with us for that. And we're going to be jumping around here once we get this shot up of this announcement here outside District Court. We're going to bring that to you. But over now to this morning, a really cool event outside of the Capitol. Nancy Pelosi led a group of women, lawmakers alike, in a rally today to kind of commemorate the 170th anniversary of the first ever women's rights convention, the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. So they had a commemorative rally and sort of press conference, news conference outside of the Capitol this morning. Kind of some cool video from there. So we're going to play that out for you, and we'll jump around. We'll cut in with anything else that's live or breaking in the next hour.
Justices became impossible to justify. Step by step, we gained the freedoms and rights men had denied us until 72 years later, we finally did the impossible and amended the Constitution to give us the right to vote. And that movement inspired movements amongst a diversity of people, including Chinese Americans who were prevented from becoming naturalized citizens so that they could not vote, and in fact did not gain that right until 1943. But it was the inspiration of the women's movement that caused that. And while the women at Seneca Falls showed us that we deserve equality, they also showed us that the only way to get it is to fight for it. So that's what we have to do today. We have to fight for access to health care, the right to make our own medical decisions, the right to keep our families together, and the right to protect everybody's access to the voting booth. So if we don't need men to tell us what choices that we can make. The heroes at Seneca Falls made sure of that. It's up to us to continue to fight until each of us has the equality that is promised in our declaration that all men and women are created equal. Thank you, and I would like to now call upon Linda Sanchez, our Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus.
Good morning, and thank you to all of you who are here today to stand with us to commemorate something that has been historic and has really pushed progress for women in this country for decades. I'm proud to stand with Representative Brenda Lawrence, with the Democratic Women's Caucus, and with many of my sisters in Congress to commemorate the Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls over 170 years ago. We honor women all across our country that kept pushing and fighting and pulling and persisting for an equal voice in our government. Their trailblazing leadership has made it possible for all of us to stand here today. We have made so much progress over the years, but we still have a long way to go. Today, women represent a relatively small but growing fraction of the United States Congress, and we have high hopes that in the next midterm elections, that number will grow even larger. Our strength and our voice come from brave rebels who fought over 170 years ago for one important thing that starts the ball rolling, and that's our right to vote. So we will continue to defend their legacy as we push for greater equality for our daughters and our granddaughters. It's not a secret that there is a concerted effort to roll back the clock on progress that women have made over all those decades. Women's rights, our right, for example, to make decisions over our own bodies, are under attack. Women's right to have equal economic opportunities are under attack. Women's right to not be discriminated against, for example, in the premiums that we pay for our health care insurance, are under attack. And there are many, many ways that this administration and this Republican-controlled Congress are trying to undermine our ability to have a voice and a seat at the table. So we have to keep up the fight. We will not stop. We will not stop until the United States Congress looks like the America it is elected to represent. And with that, I'm pleased to turn over the microphone to Representative Terry Sewell. She's the co-chair of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus, the co-chair of CBC Civil and Voting Rights Task Force, a champion for women's rights. Terry Sewell.
Thank you all for being here today and joining with us. It's such a privilege for me to be able to stand here as a member of Congress with women leaders and trailblazers from across the country in recognition of the anniversary of Seneca Falls Convention. Today's anniversary represents 170 years of our fight for women's rights, 170 years of conventions, of marches, of protests, and of petitions. 170 years of courage in the face of injustice and discrimination. 170 years and counting, and yet she still persists. As Alabama's first African-American woman elected to a federal office, I never forget that my work here is built on the sacrifices of so many other women who came before me. Women like Elizabeth Stanton, who declared in 1848 that the great truth that, quote, no just government can be formed without the consent of the governed, all of the governed. And women like Sojourner Truth, who fought the twin evils of slavery and racism. But we cannot sacrifice ourselves today and be satisfied with the accomplishments of just the past. In 2018, we are still having to fight for women's rights. You know, old battles have become new again. So many of us thought that we had won these battles. Our mothers had fought for these battles. Our foremothers had fought for these battles. But once again, progress is elusive. Progress must be obtained in every generation. We must fight for the progress that we've made and continue to make. So it's so important that we not only acknowledge the anniversary today, but we also know that we have so much more work to be done. That means passing the better deal for democracy that we as Democrats are articulating in this year's election. The better deal for democracy is our plan as Democrats to restore voter protection, to increase transparency in our government, and to stop the influence of big money in our elections. If we want to secure women's rights, we have to make sure that women have a seat at the table. And I know you all know that so many women, especially those like Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman to walk the halls of Congress, was infamous in saying, if there's no more chairs, bring a folding chair to sit at the table. We deserve to have a right at the table. We as women make up more than 50% of the population, and yet here in Congress, we're only 22%. So I say to all of you, we have much work to do because old battles have become new again. We can today celebrate 170 years of the Seneca Falls Convention, but we must remember that we have much work to do. Thank you all for coming out and supporting us today, and let us remember to put on our walking shoes because there's still a lot of marching, protesting, petitioning that we must do. Now, I'd like to bring to the stage Norma Torres, who is co-chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Task Force. Norma?
Thank
you, Terry. Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Congresswoman Lawrence, for gathering us today to mark this momentous anniversary and to renew our commitment to protect the voting rights and freedoms for all women. Just think, less than a century ago, women didn't have the right to vote. Less than 55 years ago, African American women were still barred from the ballot box. But women, from suffragists to our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, fought fiercely and courageously to change all of that. They fought for equality and progress, the very same causes driving women today to take to the streets of cities, big and small, to make sure that women get a level playing field in every industry and facet of life. You only need to look at the Women's March and the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement to see it for yourselves. Women's voices matter. They make a difference. And that has never been more important than right now, this very moment. We know that our vote is our voice. And now it is time for those voices to be heard loud and clear once again. That means in every election, remember, it was voters sitting out in 2014 midterms that resulted in Justice Gorsuch being seated instead of Merrick Garland. It was the surprise election losses of 2016 in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that will shape Justice Kennedy's seat. President Trump's nominee to replace him, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, has the power to reshape the rights and freedoms of American women for many years to come. From rolling back civil rights and voting rights to ending a woman's right to decide what to do with her own body and her ability to access reproductive care. We can't afford to turn back the clock on the progress that we have made and the women before us have worked so hard to make. It is why I am proud to co-sponsor bills that would make it easier for women to cast their votes by getting rid of burdensome identification requirements and requiring states to automatically register eligible voters. As we reflect on the incredible contributions of the women at Seneca Falls, let us also think of the world that we want to leave for our daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. Let us keep up the fight to protect their rights and to secure equality and opportunity for all women. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Congresswoman Lawrence. And it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Marcy Kaptur.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I want to thank Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence for bringing us all together. I want to thank the women who are here, women members and male members, and all of the outside organizations that have joined us. As we speak with you today, I offer my words in memory of Congresswoman Louise Slaughter of New York, who served here until her late 80s and was from Seneca Falls, and you couldn't have a single conversation with Louise when she didn't say Seneca Falls. And so I think that she joins us today in spirit, right? And the heritage of which we are a part and the progress that we are making together for the American people. Voting rights are human rights. I'm reminded of Pastor John Roberts from Indiana Missionary Baptist Church in Toledo, Ohio, who says to his congregants, no vote, no power. Your vote, your power. And as we face this election and as we anticipate celebrating the centenary of women's right to vote. It is important for us to remember that today, here in this House, women constitute about 20% of the 435 members who serve. In the entire history of the United States, of the nearly 12,000 people who have served in the House of Representatives, just a little over 200 have been women. We constitute historically about 2% of the voices that have been allowed to debate and to pass legislation inside this House of the People. In Ohio, where I come from, we are flying into the wind as we move toward this November's election. Our Secretary of State, a male, has removed over 2 million people from the voting rolls, removed over 2 million people from the voting rolls in the last 5 years. If you haven't voted in the last 6 years, you are automatically removed, even though you are eligible. We have a tremendous candidate for Secretary of State in Ohio, Kathleen Clyde. She's going to change that. She's going to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. I have 2 messages for the women and men of America, but especially for the women. Register to vote and apply to be a precinct worker at the polling place come November. Make sure you are on the inside, not the outside. And make sure that you have training to allow you to defend the vote of every single person who comes into that precinct. You must know the rules for voting. You work for a day. You help the country to preserve its republic. We invite the women of America to use their vote this year. Use your power. Thank you so very much for bringing us together, Brenda.
Now we're going to bring forward an amazing woman leader in our caucus, and that is Rosa DeLero.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you and Lois for the extraordinary work that you do with the Democratic Women's Working Group. It's such an honor for me to be here with all of my colleagues this morning, sisters, and we had a brother here a few short minutes ago. I also want to thank the organizations who are here today. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, National Women's Law Center, Delta Sigma Theta, the Women's Vote Centennial Initiative, and the American Association of University Women. And why I recognize them is because the gains that we have made over the years have been spearheaded, and we have relied on the work and the research and the data that all of these organizations have come together on, and they have helped us to forge the kinds of policy initiatives that really make a difference in the lives of women and their families today. And American women have made great strides since the Seneca Falls Convention, but we are still facing extraordinary and disproportionate economic challenges. That is why I believe we need a new Seneca Falls moment in which we demand economic equality. We must. Women still only earn 80 cents on average for every dollar paid to men, despite the fact that women are half the workforce, more than half of the population, and nearly half of the primary breadwinners in America. No surprise, then, that families are struggling. The Republican corporate tax cut has been a dream for the wealthy, but a nightmare for the rest who are still suffering from stagnant wages and the rising cost of childcare, housing, healthcare, and yes, food. In fact, according to new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, wages for ordinary non-management workers
have consequences. As the balance of our nation's highest court hangs in the balance, it's my hope that country and women will seize this moment to appreciate their power at the ballot box and to understand how critical it is that we get out and exercise the right to vote in 2018 and ensure that our voice is heard. Let me tell you briefly about the voter suppression that we're seeing across our country today. All across the country, we are seeing states resort to a playbook of suppression tactics to restrict access to the ballot box for Black women and other communities of color across the country. From photo ID rules, to proof of citizenship requirements, to cuts on early voting, racial gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, and so much more, states are working actively to limit access to the ballot box for communities of color across our country because there is so much at stake. We are seeing this administration move at a relentless pace to turn the clock back. This is a Justice Department that has reignited the war on drugs, that has turned its back on enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, that filed a brief in the Supreme Court defending voter suppression. At every turn, we intend to hold Attorney General Jeff Sessions accountable and ensure that he's using taxpayer dollars to protect the fragile civil rights of our nation's most vulnerable communities. I'm proud to stand here today with the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Democratic Women's Working Group. Together we stand on the shoulders of Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King and Ida Wells, Mary Church Terrell and Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, and so many other fierce Black women who have stood as the moral compass of our nation. Together we are fighting to save our democracy, and it is most important that we keep the current battle around the U.S. Supreme Court vacancy front and center. The U.S. Supreme Court is the final venue, the venue of last resort for the most critical and important crises in our nation. This Senate needs to do its job, vet Judge Kavanaugh carefully to ensure that he is somebody who will fairly interpret and apply the Constitution and our nation's federal civil rights laws. Too much is at stake, and we can't turn the clock back. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dave, am I okay here?
I want to recognize the presence of Delta Sigma Theta leadership. Would you please raise your hand? And the women who were disruptive and made a difference. I now have the pleasure. I would love to be in the head of the women who were at the conference in Seneca Falls when they talked about having the right to vote. I'm sure there was a woman there that thought, what if we got the power to vote and women could be elected to office? And then what if our vote equated to a woman having the highest seat in our House of Representatives? I know today, those women who we stand on their shoulders will be very proud of this next amazing woman that I'm introducing, and that's Nancy Pelosi, our Democratic leader.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Lawrence, and thank you for your leadership of the Democratic Women's Working Group. To you and to Lois Frankel, thank you for bringing us together with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Progressive Caucus, and of course the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and our friends in leadership on the outside of the Congress. I'm just going to tell you two stories and associate myself with the remarks of those who have spoken before. I know that our longest serving woman in Congress in the House of Representatives, Marcy Kaptur, was here earlier. Is Marcy, and the godmother of When Women Succeed, America Succeeds, Rosa DeLauro, and so many champions for women in the Congress and outside the Congress. But listening to the comments of I was reminded of two stories, because we are talking a lot about shoulders. And when we celebrate this 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, remember a couple things. First of all, the proper celebration of that will we have the highest number of women and women of color in the Congress of the United States at that time, and we fully intend to do that in great numbers. And it's going to be quite wonderful. Listening to the speeches about shoulders reminded me of when I went to my first meeting as a leader of the Democrats in Congress at the White House with President Bush and the other House and Senate Democrats and Republican leadership. I thought this was an ordinary meeting at the White House. I've been to many as an appropriator and as an intelligence person. But when I went in the door, and the door closed behind me, I realized it was unlike any other meeting I had ever been to, or that any woman had ever been to, because there it was, the leadership of our country, all white male, and I, as a woman, having a seat at the table. And why I tell this story is because, as President Bush, ever gracious, welcoming me there, said how he thought it would be interesting to have a woman, a different view, etc. I felt very closed in my seat. Now, my colleagues have heard me tell this story over and over again. I felt very closed in my seat. I was getting just pushed together on my seat. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then I realized there I was with Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Alice Paul. The list goes on and on. Our suffragettes who fought so hard for us to have the right to vote. And as they sat with me on that chair just for an instant, I could hear them say, "At last, we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone. And my thought was, we want more. We want more women, people of color, etc. at that table. But it was, again, a reminder that none of us needs, but nonetheless an impression that we're all standing on the shoulders of those people so courageously in Seneca Falls who set forth that important proclamation those many, many years ago that we observe today. I also recall a story that when I became Speaker, I wanted to have more women and people of color represented in the statues, etc., in the Congress, and we were dedicating the bust of Sojourner Truth. And it was new in the Obama administration, brand new at that time, and we were honored to have Michelle Obama come speak. And when she spoke, she said this. She said, "You know, I can't help but think what Sojourner Truth would think to see a woman Speaker of the House. How thrilled she would be. But I can't even imagine what she would think to see me, Michelle Obama, as the First Lady of the United States." So moving, so moving. I get emotional just thinking of Michelle Obama talking about an African-American first family and what Sojourner Truth would think of that. But this is a time, and our founders, those women whose shoulders we stand on, and all the young people who stand on some of our shoulders, have to know that what they taught us, this is an ongoing fight. The same people who resisted women having the right to vote resist women having the right to anything. And again, the challenge continues to go on. In that Supreme Court, hidden a little bit now by the trees, but clear in the mind of the American people the role it plays in protecting our rights. We must fight to make sure that people who go there, for decades really, people who go there honor the Constitution of the United States, honor the stare decisis that says you cannot overturn Brown versus the Board of Education. You cannot overturn marriage equality admissions, Roe v. Wade, the rest of it. These have been considered constitutional by this court before and have the full support of the American people. So as we go forward in all of this, we just have to remember that it's an ongoing fight. And just remember that when women got the right to vote, the headline said, "Women given the right to vote." Women weren't given the right to vote. Women fought for it, they marched for it, they struggled for it, they starved for it, they were starved for it. They were rejected by their families. It's a fight. It was a fight then, and they weren't given the right to vote. So nobody ever gives power to anybody else. We have to assert it. So I thank our Brenda Lawrence and Lois Frankel and all those the leadership for bringing us together here today to reassert our commitment in that fight and to be strong shoulders for others to stand on as we stand on the shoulders of those who courageously fought so hard and went before us as we observe the 170th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Declaration, which shook the world. We must continue to shake the world. I yield back. Thank you.
Now we're going to bring LaShawn Warren, who is the Senior Vice President of Campaigns and Program, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Good morning. I'm LaShawn Warren, Vice President of Programs and Campaigns for the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. It is a coalition of more than 200 national organizations working to build an America as good as its ideals. It is truly an honor to be here with such extraordinary women, with all of you, who stand on the front lines fighting for the soul of our nation. But the occasion that brings us together today is the anniversary of the historic Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls. It reminds us that this work is not new. We carry forth the legacy of brave women who fought before us, women whose wisdom, resolve, perseverance made us a better America. I want to begin by lifting up another important date this week, the birthday of Ida B. Wells, a fearless journalist who broadcast to the world over 100 years ago lessons that we must not forget today. Voting rights are civil rights, and campaigns to suppress the right to vote are campaigns to suppress the power of the people, to erase our bodies, to silence our stories and our voices. We need look no further than the Trump administration's playbook to know this to be true. The people who would restrict our right to vote are the same people who would separate families along borders. They're the same people who draw districts and maps that undercut the representation of people of color. They are the same people who lock up Black and brown people at disproportionate rates to strip us of our basic human rights. They are the same people who would pick a Supreme Court nominee who would take away women's control of our bodies and undermine the right to vote. These deliberate tactics seek to silence. But I am here today to say that we will not be quiet. We will not relent in our pressure. Millions of women across the country, many of whom never considered themselves to be activists, have taken up the fight to fight for a fair and just America. An unprecedented number of women are running at all levels of government. Young women are marching for Black lives, gun safety, religious freedom, and protection of dreamers. Voters of all colors are rejecting hate and voting their values, like in states like Virginia and Alabama.
Hey guys, as we continue to cover and show you guys this press conference, or this rally rather, outside of the Capitol, I want to alert you to just a little bit of breaking news on the right side of your screen there. A tweet from American University, just about a mile or less down the road from where we are right now in DC, initial reports there of an armed intruder possibly near campus. They're locking down the campus at American University according to their tweets here, and asking people to kind of stay away from windows. And if outside, they're saying leave campus immediately. The police are responding to that call. If we scroll up to their most recent tweet Just about 5 minutes ago, the university says that the lockdown does continue. The investigation is focused on their main campus because this is a campus that is sort of spread amongst different streets and blocks, and main campus, East Campus, and that area of New Mexico Avenue. So they are suspending shuttle operations and continuing to keep students on lockdown at American. And we are sending some people. We're going to get some more reports for you if this does turn out to be something. So hoping it does not, but we are going to be continuing to monitor the situation there. Just a little bit of breaking news locally here, really close actually to DC. On this side, bottom left of your screen, you see Capitol Hill. Over on the other side of town, where this rally took place this morning to commemorate that anniversary of women's rights. So we're going to continue to listen into this, but we will make sure we alert you if anything does change regards to this American University tweet that we are just seeing. Just about 20 minutes ago, that first tweet came out. So again, we'll stay on that, make sure you know about it, and we'll be back with you inside the newsroom with more.
Thousands of minority voters. He issued a ruling to allow the government to continue blocking a young immigrant woman from accessing abortion care. And he has been critical of the Affordable Care Act. And according to some of his clerks, he has written the legal roadmap to dismantling it. And in employment discrimination cases, Judge Kavanaugh has sided with workers, or sided against workers time and time again. With this nomination, women's ability to make decisions over our own bodies, our ability to access health care, our ability to succeed at work and at school is on the line. So on this anniversary of the Seneca Fall Convention, I say to all the women who are marching the streets, who are calling Congress, who are protesting the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, to remember that the ultimate act of disruption and the ultimate use of our power is to vote. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who have come out today. Our message is loud and clear. We are the moral and intelligent 50% of this government, of this country. And we will not be silent. We will not sit on the sideline, just like the women at Seneca Falls, who refuse to be pushed to the side and not being given the right to vote. So we stood up and we took it. This is not an anti-anything. This is pro-America. This is pro-family. This is pro-human rights. And we will continue to be a voice. And as we as women, the beautiful sex of this great country, as we continue to use our brains and our intelligence and our heart and our compassion, we will be leaders and we'll keep fighting and protecting the right to vote. Thank you all so much.
Leader Pelosi.
All your words
Leader Pelosi. Leader Pelosi.
We gotta continue to.
To the distinguished gentlelady from California, the ranking Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee, Ms. Lofgren.
The gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I support fair and humane enforcement of our immigration laws, but that's not what this resolution is about. It's nothing but a ploy to distract us from critical issues facing our country. A most urgent issue now is the need to reunify thousands of children, including babies, who were forcefully torn from their parents' arms at the border. Despite court orders requiring reunification, over 2,000 children remain separated from their parents. This bill does nothing to address that humanitarian crisis, a crisis created by President Trump's so-called zero-tolerance policy. The bill does nothing, for example, to more quickly reunify children like Jefferson, a 6-year-old boy taken from his father after traveling together from Guatemala seeking asylum. They were kept apart for almost 2 heart-wrenching months. They were finally reunified 3 days ago. The traumatic effects of the separation were clear. Jefferson was unemotional, with a vacant look in his eyes. He thought for those 2 excruciating months that his father no longer loved him or that he was dead. Jefferson had a cough, he had bruises, he had a rash all over his body. It's not clear whether Jefferson will ever fully recover emotionally, and there are many more kids like Jefferson who remain separated from their parents. As members of Congress, we can't sit on the sidelines as witnesses to government-sponsored child abuse. We must take concrete steps to end this tragedy and pass legislation to prevent it from ever happening again, and this resolution doesn't do that. This resolution does not even acknowledge the plight of babies separated from their mothers, nor does it make any recommendations for family reunification. This resolution is nothing more than a feeble attempt at political gamemanship. The resolution shows the Republican majority is unwilling to solve our immigration crisis, just as they're unwilling to tackle rising health care costs, wage stagnation, a pending trade war, and the president's love fest with Russia. With a little more than a week left before August recess, the Republican majority is more interested in political games than actually governing. Rather than doing anything meaningful for the American people, we're wasting our time on a political stunt. It's just shameful, and I refuse to play this game. I intend to vote present on this meaningless resolution, and we're...
Quick update here, guys, on this lockdown that continues at American University. You can see in the tweet on the right side of your screen, that is the latest just a few seconds ago from the school. They do have a shelter set in place. They're continuing to search the school building by building and conduct a full search of every building and every room to make sure it is all clear. We'll make sure we give you the info as it comes in. Again, local university here in D.C., American University on lockdown after reports of a possible intruder who is armed near campus.
Support, not a present vote. It is disgusting and unconscionable that members of the political left, members in this very chamber, continue to denigrate these patriots. One prominent gubernatorial candidate declared ICE a terrorist organization. A House member called ICE fascist. Another member of this body said that ICE agents who are just doing their job were cowardly. I wish I was making this up. Talk about shameful statements. Talk about inflammatory statements to a law enforcement agency that is responsible for the internal enforcement of both our immigration and customs laws. Mr. Speaker, these attacks are utterly despicable. While #AbolishICE might make for a catchy bumper sticker for radical leftists, it is harmful to our law enforcement. Today I join with my colleagues in supporting this resolution and commending ICE agents for their hard work. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, what is disgusting is for Congress to sit idly by while children are ripped from the arms of their parents and abused. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this is what it takes to have a debate on the floor about family separation. It is outrageous that my Republican colleagues are playing pure politics with a resolution that does absolutely nothing to address the most pressing crisis before us, which is the separation of 3,000 children from their parents. It is about putting kids in cages and parents in prison who are seeking asylum. Mr. Speaker, in spite of court orders, this administration still has yet to reunite these children with their families. And I will tell you, these are parents who have even been denied the opportunity to speak to their kids for more than 10 minutes twice a week. Mr. Speaker, this bill does nothing to prevent President Trump from again ordering enforcement agents to rip breastfeeding babies from their mother's arms. This isn't just rhetoric. This happened numerous times under Trump's zero tolerance, zero humanity policy. In one case, for instance, an asylum seeker from Honduras reported that federal agents took her daughter from her while she was breastfeeding in a Texas detention center. And when she resisted, as any mother would do, because I am a mother and I can say that from the bottom of my heart, this mother was handcuffed. Handcuffed for wanting to feed her baby. Stripping babies from the arms of their mothers is cruel and inhumane, and this body should be debating that policy, should be fixing that policy, instead of putting forward a ridiculous, do-nothing political resolution. Mr. Speaker, I urge my Republican colleagues to put their attention on real issues instead of continuing to play games with children's lives. I thank you and I yield back.
Gentlelady motion yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Speaker, I yield myself 15 seconds to point out to my Democratic colleagues that every single one of them had the opportunity and every single one of them voted against H.R. 6136, which addressed this issue and a solution for DACA recipients. Every one of them voted against it. It's now my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, the House Majority Whip.
The gentleman from Louisiana, the Majority Whip, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank my colleague from Virginia for yielding the time. And I especially want to thank my colleague, Congressman Higgins from Louisiana, for his leadership in bringing this resolution to the floor. And what does the resolution do? It simply says we stand behind our ICE agents, those brave men and women who are keeping America safe. These are the people on the front lines of removing terrorists from our country. These are the people, by the way, last year alone, who removed over 100,000 criminals from our country. And they want to vote present? My colleagues on the other side are talking about voting present. Let me ask you, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the numbers, last year, ICE agents, they rescued or identified 518 victims of human trafficking. What if those ICE agents would have voted present that day instead of rescuing those victims of human trafficking? Luckily, Mr. Speaker, they didn't vote present. They showed up and did their job to keep America safe. What if last year, Mr. Speaker, those ICE agents who rescued or identified 904 people who were sexually exploited children, what if they voted present that day instead of rescuing those 904 sexually exploited children? Luckily, they didn't vote present, Mr. Speaker. They showed up and did their job. We need to stand up for them. We need to stand up for what's important at keeping this country safe. Are we for open borders? Absolutely not, unless you don't vote yes on this resolution. If you don't vote yes, there's one choice. There's one button to hit if you support these men and women who are keeping our country safe, who are keeping us from open borders. That vote is yes. Any other vote than a yes vote is for open borders and somehow not supporting these men and women. Let's look at what's resolved here. That we express our continued support for those ICE agents, that we denounce calls to abolish ICE, and that we support efforts of all federal agencies, state law enforcement, military personnel who bring law and order to our nation's border. The only vote on this resolution is yes. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 15 seconds, first of all.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Yes, every Democrat voted against H.R. 6136, which provided for indefinite detention of entire families, among other obnoxious provisions. And so did many Republicans, thank God. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished Democratic whip, the gentleman from Maryland.
The gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank the ICE agents for being present. It's unfortunate that our Republican colleagues are not present doing the business that cries out to be done. I'm voting present on this resolution because it's a sham and a distraction. It's an outrageous attempt to hide the continuing suffering of children behind a partisan attack on Democrats. This is exactly the kind of gotcha vote that alienates the Americans from our government. It's shameless and it's inappropriate. Inappropriate because Republicans are not doing a single thing to address the crisis of children still separated from their parents, even after a court ruled that they need to be reunited. Democrats refuse to play Republicans' game when it comes to children's well-being and the safety of those who come here seeking asylum. We're not falling for this trap, and you can say we're doing it as much as you want. Democrats support secure borders and honor the service of all those whose lives are at risk in protecting our country and our people. And I take a backseat to no one in this House over the years supporting our law enforcement personnel. But we will neither be silent nor will we cease fighting to bring an end to the dangerous and inhumane policies of the Trump administration that are traumatizing families and children at our borders, which Senator McCain correctly called an affront to the decency of the American people. Shame on the Republican House majority for putting such blatant partisanship ahead of the children. Shame on you for using our law enforcement agents as pawns in your political games. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time is remaining on each side?
The gentleman from Virginia has 6 1/4 minutes. The gentleman from New York has 11 minutes.
At this time, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the men and women of ICE who courageously serve our country every single day. Recently, ICE agents have been the targets of vicious name-calling and partisan attacks. Some have even described ICE as a terrorist organization. To make matters worse, some politicians in Washington are now calling on Congress to abolish ICE. But just last year, Mr. Speaker, an overwhelming bipartisan majority in the House, including Leader Pelosi, voted to authorize ICE into law for the first time. This kind of dishonest double standard is politics at its worst. Abolishing ICE is a reckless and dangerous idea that jeopardizes the safety of American communities.
So guys, obviously you are hearing debate on both sides of this aisle here from the House. This is the House floor debating ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And we've been going on this for quite a while now, and also concurrently telling you that this lockdown continues. It's still underway at American University right here in D.C. No real new information there. We know police are searching those buildings kind of one by one to give the all clear, and hoping, crossing fingers, that that does become a non-real news item here, but we will be watching and waiting to hear more from them via Twitter. Meanwhile, we're getting ready for the White House press briefing, setting the stage right here. It's a live look inside that press briefing room. It was supposed to be around 2 o'clock. They just pushed it back to about 2:15, which is exactly right now, Eastern time. So we're going to leave you here because this is hopefully starting up shortly, and let you guys watch in for this. Sarah Sanders will be speaking to the press. We haven't heard from her, at least in a live capacity, inside this room for quite a while now, and this all comes during a pretty kind of hot week in the news here for President Trump, meeting with his cabinet, responding to the backlash after his meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki at the Helsinki summit. So lots of questions to be answered here. You know, it's going to get moderately intense possibly inside this briefing room. So we're going to be watching for this. And if you're on the stream with us, thank you for joining us here on YouTube or on our website. We'll leave you here, and Sam will be up next to host the next portion of our live stream. So we'll see you guys soon. Take a look and listen inside the briefing room.
I get to sit a little more nicely, Cher. I'm in trouble. It's not sitting right, Cher. I mean, it's fine. It just looks terrible. Can I take it out and redo it? Sit there. I'm just going to move the wire. Yeah. I don't like this microphone. You stay there. I'll get it. I'll figure it out. I'm going to take it off after the briefing, though, because it's not.
Hey, Rocco, how's it going? Six seconds, did you say? Okay. Yep. Okay. All right. All right, thanks. Yeah, what else would we be doing? That's all that I have prepared. Those will hold for next year, you know, Jen. We just have to make sure that they have the All-Star game in Washington, D.C. again next year. Okay. Dana, the president, as well as some White House officials that I've spoken to, seem very frustrated that the coverage of the Helsinki summit, where Trump and Putin met for more time behind closed doors than they spent at the podiums for that press conference, is being boiled down just to that one comment that has since been cleaned up, where the president suggested that he trusted Putin's word over the assessment of the U.S. intel community. So today, the president went on Twitter and he wrote this: "So many people at higher ends of intelligence loved my press conference performance in Helsinki. Putin and I discussed many important subjects at our earlier meeting. We got along well, which truly bothered many haters who wanted to see a boxing match. Big results will come." But there's some Democrats on Capitol Hill who are not buying that, and there's a new push from lawmakers up there to subpoena the translator who was in the room with the president for his meeting with Putin, helping him with that, because they want to see what really happened, or at least have some kind of an official record of what was said. And just a few minutes ago on the floor of the House of Representatives, another Democratic lawmaker, Congressman Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, urged his Republican colleagues to stage an intervention with President Trump because this Democratic congressman says he doesn't think that the president can be trusted to do the right thing. Dana. It's over trade, and he's essentially threatening major punishment if some trade negotiations next week here in Washington go sideways. So that was one of the highlights from the cabinet meeting that happened earlier. This briefing with Sarah Sanders is the other big item on the agenda here at the White House today, and we expect it to begin any minute. Dana?
You're blocking me. This is my good side. Long way to go. You know, yes, and out not just part of It's going to be the must read for our time. Yeah, it's time to back.
Size matters.
Good afternoon. A couple of announcements. The President will be traveling to Kansas City, Missouri next Tuesday, July 24th. He will address the Veterans of Foreign Wars 119th Annual Convention. President Trump is committed to our veterans and has worked to reform the VA and to ensure veterans are given the care and support they deserve. The President looks forward to being with the more than 4,000 veterans in attendance. Yesterday, the U.S. Senate confirmed Randy Quarles as the Vice Chair for Supervision at the Federal Reserve, but it is unfortunate that his nomination was continually delayed. There are still 3 more nominees to the Fed who have yet to receive a vote. It is inexcusable that Senate Democrats have delayed confirming the President's nominees. An even worse example of unnecessary delay is the nomination of Don Stump to be a commissioner on the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. There is no opposition to her, but yet she has been waiting for 400 days for a vote. We urge Senate Democrats to stop these unnecessary delays and confirm these qualified nominees. Lastly, on behalf of the President and the White House, we offer prayers for United States Secret Service Special Agent Noel Edward Remagan and his family, including his wife and 2 young children. The Secret Service announced this morning that Agent Remagan suffered a stroke while on duty in Scotland last week and has tragically passed away. He was a 5-year veteran of the United States Marines and spent 19 years with the Secret Service. The President and the First Lady are deeply grateful for his lifetime of devotion to his country.
and the men and women of the Secret Service make enormous sacrifices for our safety and security, and we are forever in their debt. And with that, I will take your questions. Major.
Earlier, Cecilia asked the president, is Russia still targeting the U.S.? He said no. Is that what the president actually believes? Did he understand the question? And is his position that no, Russia is not doing anything to interfere or meddle in the 2018 election?
Yeah, I had a chance to speak with the president after those comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions. The president and his administration are working very hard to make sure that Russia is unable to meddle in our elections, as they have done in the past and as we have stated.
So he does believe it's going on.
Well, since there's currently not an election today, not specifically, but we certainly believe that we are taking steps to make sure they can't do it again, unlike previous administrations. This president is actually taking bold action and reform to make sure it doesn't happen again, but he does believe that they would target certainly U.S. elections again.
Between the president and the DNI coach who said the red lights are blinking on this topic.
No, as I just said, that's why we're taking steps to ensure that these things don't happen again. We wouldn't actually spend as much time and effort as we are if we didn't believe that they were still looking at us. From the beginning of his administration, President Trump has actually taken action to defend our election system from meddling and interference. I'm going to read through a few of the things that we're doing. In May of 2017, President Trump signed an executive order to strengthen and review the cybersecurity of our nation and its critical infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security has taken the lead in working with all 50 states, local governments, and private companies to improve election security. DHS has increased coordination among all election partners. 34 states, 52 county and local governments, and 5 election companies receive cybersecurity scans regularly from DHS. DHS plans to provide on-site risk and vulnerability assessments to all states that request it. So far, 18 states have requested this assessment. A new pilot program was launched to increase rapid response capabilities on Election Day, and in 2017, on-site cybersecurity support was provided. In March of 2018, Congress provided the Election Assistance Commission with $380 million in funding for election assistance grants to states. These are steps that we've taken to prevent it from happening. These are steps that we've taken because we see that there's a threat there. Cecilia.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to clarify what you just said. Dan Coates said point blank the threat is still ongoing from Russia. Does this White House believe that currently this threat is still ongoing?
Certainly, like I just said, we believe that the threat still exists, which is why we are taking steps to prevent it. Again, you wouldn't go through that lengthy process if you weren't.
Yeah. The president yesterday clarified his comments from his press conference Monday with Vladimir Putin. Does the president stand by all of his other public comments on the trip, including his comments in an interview criticizing Theresa May's handling of the Brexit negotiations, his comments that Russia controlled Germany over that pipeline, and other comments in that press conference Monday where he continued to cast doubt on the intelligence community's assessment of Russian meddling in the 2016 election? Does he stand by all of those?
Again, the president saw a need to clarify the position. He saw how his comments were being interpreted. He looked at the transcript and clarified those comments.
And Sarah, does the White House have any response to the arrest and indictment of a Russian national who is accused of trying to infiltrate American political organizations, purely on the right, to try to influence American politics?
Certainly, we're looking at that. But just to clarify, I know that there was massive media hysteria yesterday over confusion between that individual and a White House staffer, which I think shows, frankly, the outrageousness and the just desire to find the negative in everything that this president does. Just because somebody was simply redheaded, they were accused of being some sort of spy for Russia. I think that this has gotten totally out of control. You guys need to take a little bit of a step back, slow down, and quit going after the Trump administration on every single thing that takes place.
You have no response to the indictment, but you have a response to the media?
I said we're looking at it. But this is a lengthy process. We're going through it. However, I do have a response to the fact that simply because somebody had the same hair color, they were accused of being a Russian spy by a large number of people, frankly, in this room. Roberta.
The President today and the Secretary of State both spoke about progress being made in trade talks with Mexico. And I'm wondering whether trilateral talks with Mexico and Canada And also the bilateral talks with Canada are effectively off the table for now. Is the administration choosing to go with Mexico where they see if there's progress and forget about the trilateral approach?
We're continuing both of those tracks. We see a lot of progress on the conversations with Mexico, and if we could make a bilateral deal with them, we're certainly very happy to do that. But again, we're continuing both conversations, both tracks. Maggie?
Thank you, Sarah. Russian authorities yesterday named several Americans who they want to question who they claim were involved in Bill Browder's quote-unquote crimes in their terms, including a former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Does President Trump support that idea? Is he open to having U.S. officials questioned by Russia?
The president's going to meet with his team, and we'll let you know when we have an announcement on that.
For a second, is that a topic that came up in their conversation? Did President Putin raise this with President Trump?
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front. Blake?
Thank you, Sarah. The president earlier today said that there could be, quote, tremendous retribution for the European Union if there's not a deal struck on auto imports. In the past, he has talked about potentially putting a tariff of 20%. Is that what he meant today by tremendous retribution, or is it possible he goes even beyond that?
Certainly that's an option on the table that the president is considering, but we are in the investigation process right now, and we'll let you know when we have an announcement. Yumi?
You brought up the Fed. The Beige Book just came out, which is anecdotes from across the country of what's happening with the economy. Here's some of the headlines. Manufacturers are concerned about tariffs. They're dealing with higher prices because of trade. Tariffs are increasing metal prices, and ag prices have fallen because of Chinese tariffs. It's not necessarily a rosy picture with the tariff situation. Your response to those headlines would be what?
The president is focused on long-term economic principles. We have one of the strongest economies that we've had in decades. He continues to look for ways to help protect American workers, and he's going to continue to do that on a number of different fronts in a number of different ways. Again, this is short-term, and the president hopes to open up a number of different markets and to create a more playing trade field across the globe. Yumi?
Hi, Sarah. Two questions. The first one, in Finland, President Trump, when talking about the stances of the U.S. intelligence community and of Russia, he said, quote, that I have confidence in both parties. After a young woman was killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, after protesting neo-Nazis, he said, I think there's blame on both sides. Some people see this as a president continuously making false equivalences. What do you say to that criticism?
I would not compare the two situations. The president, I think, said exactly what he thought yesterday in his remarks, and I would refer you back to those. Josh? Sorry, go ahead.
And also, does the president see the interference in the 2016 election and possibly in the midterms as an attack on democracy, American democracy? The Secretary for Homeland Security said that it was an attack on American democracy, but the president said that the Democrats are weak, that Republicans basically had better systems. Does he see it as an issue of American democracy or just his opponents being attacked?
Again, the president thinks that we have to focus on securing our election integrity and our election systems, which is why he has spent so much time with his administration making sure that this doesn't happen again. Let's not forget that this didn't happen under President Trump's watch. This happened under the Obama administration. We're taking steps. We're making bold reforms to try to fix this and make sure it never happens again because we take it seriously and because we recognize that our election system are incredibly important and is certainly a cornerstone of our democracy. Josh?
The president spent 2 hours. The president spent 2 hours and 10 minutes with Vladimir Putin. Was there a deal made on Syria? Was there a deal made on anything? Can you give us any sense of what came out of that meeting?
Certainly, as the president said, a number of issues were raised, including Syrian humanitarian aid, Iran's nuclear ambition, Israeli security, North Korean denuclearization, Ukraine and the occupation of Crimea, reducing Russian and U.S. nuclear arsenals, and of course, your favorite topic, Russia's interference in our elections. All of these issues were talked about. This is the beginning of the dialogue with Russia and our administration and theirs, and we're going to continue working through those things. But those were all of the topics, and certainly probably others that were covered.
Follow up on a number of issues, from the annexing of Crimea to election meddling. The president seems to spend more time criticizing his predecessor, Barack Obama, for letting it happen in his telling than Vladimir Putin. Do you have any sense why the president has not been more critical of Putin for some of these events that the entire world stage has really gone after him about?
Look, I think the president, as he has said many times before, has been tougher on Russia than anybody. I think you can see that in all of the actions that he's taken, whether it was a plant that was closed due to aluminum and steel tariffs that were put in place by this president. The Treasury Department has issued new sanctions on numerous individuals and entities in Russia. The president has continued sanctions on Russia's malicious cyber activity in response to election hacking. We've expelled 60 Russian operatives from the United States and closed 2 consulates. President Trump issued 4 statements condemning Russia's poisoning of UK citizens on UK soil, authorized the sale of lethal aid to Ukraine, authorized military strikes against the Assad regime in Syria, and has repeatedly called out Russia's actions, exporting energy to our allies in Eastern Europe. Look, the president has been extremely tough on Russia, and to say anything different is just not true.
Why is he critical of other world leaders by name far more often than Vladimir Putin? Why won't he criticize Putin by name?
I think he has. I think he has called them out for interfering our election. He's been tough on Russia repeatedly, and he's taken action against Russia on a number of fronts that I just listed off.
Like Monday, when he was beside him on Monday, though, why wasn't he critical of Vladimir Putin's actions?
Look, they had a number of conversations. The president discussed some of these things directly, face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. He addressed him again yesterday. The president also sees this as an opportunity, as he said many times, to be able to work with Russia. He recognizes the fact that 90% of the world's nuclear weapons are under the direction of the United States and Russia. He thinks it's a good thing to get along with the other person that controls that much of the nuclear arsenal across the globe. He wants to create a more stable world, a more peaceful world, and we can't do that if we can't get along with Russia in some capacity. And so certainly we've called him out. We've been tough. We've approached this in a totally different fashion than has been previously done, because what's been done in the past hasn't worked. So we're trying a new approach, but to act like he hasn't been tough on Russia, that he hasn't called them out, is simply not true, and it simply completely changes everything that this administration has done in regards to that country. Josh, I'm going to keep going. Justin?
Sarah, a minute ago you described the negative impacts of the trade conflict with China as short term, but that's only true if we're able to strike a better deal. And from the outside, since the tariffs went on 2 weeks ago, it seems like those negotiations have broken down. So I'm wondering if you could tell us what the status of them are, why the Treasury Secretary isn't meeting one-on-one with China when he's in Argentina for the G20, and what it would take from the Chinese or from the U.S. to restart those talks.
Look, I'm not going to negotiate with you guys. I'm going to leave that to Secretary Mnuchin and Ambassador Lighthizer. We're continuing to have conversations with China. We're continuing to look for ways that we can have a better trade deal with them. Steve?
I want to follow up on Maggie's question, because she asked about the idea that Putin offered of essentially allowing Robert Mueller and his investigators to go to Russia to oversee or witness the interrogations of the Russian military intelligence officers if the U.S. would reciprocate and have Russian investigators come here to watch American citizens face questions about the crimes that they allegedly committed in Russia. The president called it an interesting idea. He said it was an incredible offer. Why would he say that?
He said it was an interesting idea. He didn't commit to anything. He wants to work with his team and determine if there's any validity that would be helpful to the process. But again, we've committed to nothing, and it was an idea that they threw out.
Sarah, some Democrats on Capitol Hill now are saying that they want to drag the translator who was in the room with the president and Vladimir Putin before congressional committees to find out exactly what was said in their private meeting. Is that something that the White House would ever support?
That's something that would go through the State Department. Mike?
The list of subjects you went through as far as for the one-on-one meeting, unless I missed it, were sanctions discussed at all? Did the president bring it up, or did President Putin bring it up to President Trump?
I'm not aware. I'd have to ask to be sure. Hallie?
Just one quick one. Yesterday, the president's revision, it was kind of seen widely that he was leaving himself a little bit of room when he said there could have been others too who meddled. Was he referring to any specific intelligence on that, or was that his instinct?
Certainly the president receives a number of briefings and has talked about this subject pretty extensively. We're aware of others that have made attempts, but I can't get into any of that here at this point. Hallie?
2 questions for you, and I want to just clarify something you talked about at the beginning of the briefing.
So despite the video that shows the president looking at Cecilia and answering no to this question about whether Russia is still targeting the U.S., and despite multiple people in the room understanding that the president was responding to that question, and despite the president having never before said the word no repeatedly to usher reporters out of the room, you're saying it's a reverse. You're saying the president said this is
the first thing that the
time.
president said after the question was asked was "Thank you very much," and then he said, "No, I'm not answering any more questions." And even further, I think even Cecilia didn't realize what the answer was because she asked for clarification and he didn't answer the follow-up. Again, because she wasn't sure. I talked to the president. He wasn't answering that question. He was saying no, he's not taking questions, and I've stated what our position is.
Let me get my question, Sarah, because I haven't actually asked it yet, which is the president. Now, this is the second time in 3 days that the president of the White House has come out and reversed what the president has said. To the opposite of what it was
I'm interpreting what the president said. I'm not reversing it.
Way.
I was in the room as well, and I didn't take it the way you did.
But why should this president have any credibility to Americans in what he says if, in fact, 24 hours later, or in this case, 3 hours later, the White House comes out and says, just kidding?
First of all, that's not what I said. I was interpreting what the president's intention was and stating the administration's policy. It's not exactly what you just explained. We never said just kidding. And I think that you can take the fact that the president has credibility because he saw that he had misspoken and he wanted to clarify that yesterday, which he did. So when he sees that he's misspoken, he comes out and he says that. Jordan.
Follow up on
Sorry, I'm
Josh.
going to keep moving.
Jordan, go ahead. Well, just to follow up on my second question, Sarah.
Sorry, you've asked two. I'm going to move on to Jordan.
You told Josh the president has been
once again, Hallie, I'm moving on to Jordan. Jordan, go ahead.
Sorry, Hallie, go ahead if you want.
Thanks, Jordan. You said to
actually,
Josh,
I'm going to take a question from Jordan.
Critical of Vladimir Putin. I just want to know when, because I don't think any of us remember. At least I don't remember a time when the president has publicly called out Vladimir Putin.
I think by stating the fact that the president said that Russia interfered with our election, that's a pretty bold call out of another world leader. Jordan, go ahead.
Senators Rubio and Van Hollen have introduced legislation that would impose new sanctions on Russia if the intelligence agencies find they meddle in the 2018 midterms or in the future. Would the President Trump support a proposal like that?
I'm not going to get into a hypothetical situation until we see a final piece of legislation and also a determination if there's election meddling. Again, our goal is to stop that from happening, which is why we've spent such a significant amount of time in the first year and a half of our administration focusing on protecting the election integrity system. John, go ahead.
Sarah, is voter suppression included with that, please?
If we could go on the people that I've called on. I'm just asking you a question because you
choose not to call on me. Is voter suppression part of that election process that the president is trying to look for?
John, go ahead.
Oh, you're not going to answer that.
Voter suppression is a huge
issue that a community in America has
ahead.
asked about. You're not going to answer me.
John, go ahead.
That's all right, fine.
Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to ask you about the immediate reaction to the president's comments that he made at that joint press conference in Helsinki. It was immediate. Every cable channel, Fox, NBC, CNN, reacted immediately to the suggestion the president made that he did not believe that Russia interfered in the U.S. presidential election. I got my inbox inundated with emails from Republican members of Congress with their reaction immediately. And 24 hours, it took 24 hours for the president to correct the record. Why did it take so long for the president to clarify the comments that he made at that press conference?
Look, the president put out an initial tweet after boarding Air Force One that clarified his comments on the intelligence community, wanted to make sure that was clear. And at the very first chance he had in a public setting the following day, he clarified his comments. And I don't think that it was that long for that to be the very first public appearance that he had following arriving back to the United States.
So actually, it's a pretty long time, and it was out there for quite a bit.
It wasn't actually 24 hours before he responded at all. Again, he put out an initial tweet from Air Force One.
Comment on this to clarify his remarks to change the would to wouldn't, or the wouldn't to would. And I think that a lot of people would argue that there was ample time for the president. He tweets all the time from Air Force One.
And he tweeted that night.
To put out a statement which clarified what he meant to say during the joint news conference, and he didn't do that. What took so long is my question.
Once he reviewed the transcript, he wanted to publicly address the clarification, in which he did.
Constantly,
There
Sarah.
are currently efforts within Congress to impeach Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Is that something that the White House would support for lack of cooperation in turning over documents to Congress?
The president's made clear he'd like all documents to be turned over, but we're continuing to work with our Department of Justice. I don't have anything further on that. Jim, go ahead.
To follow up on that, would the White House denounce that effort then? Do they have confidence within the Deputy Attorney General?
The president would like to see the documents turned over. When the president no longer has confidence in someone, his administration will let you know. Jim?
Sure. On Friday at the press conference with Prime Minister May, I asked the president as he was leaving whether or not he would tell Vladimir Putin to stay out of U.S. elections. As he was leaving with Prime Minister, he said yes. Did the president tell Vladimir Putin at their summit in Helsinki to stay out of U.S. elections?
Certainly the president, as both he and President Putin said, discussed election meddling. I think we've made very clear what our position is on that front.
You're saying that they discussed election meddling, but did the president of the United States tell the president of Russia to stay out of U.S. elections?
The president has made clear to Vladimir Putin that he should stay out of U.S. elections. Sorry, I'm going to keep moving. April, go ahead.
Was there a recording?
Sorry, Jim, I'm going to take a couple last questions.
Was there a recording made of their one-on-one meeting?
I'm not
Does
aware
that
of one.
exist?
I'm not aware of one.
So Sarah, since you're saying that the president is very concerned about the election process, you talk about what he's doing. You did not mention voter suppression in that. Voter suppression has been an issue for decades, and particularly in these last few elections. Is voter suppression now on the table? When he was talking about voter fraud, people were talking about voter suppression as well. Is voter suppression on the table as well?
We want to do everything within our power to protect the integrity of our elections, and we're going to look at that on a number of fronts. The reason I address these specific issues is because of Russia's involvement in our elections in the past. I'm going to take one last question. Right here, Jim.
Sarah, I want to change topic a minute, if I may, and go south.
Sure, I think that'd be fine.
Thank you. So the incoming president of Mexico has made two very bold suggestions. Number one, he's looking at giving amnesty to the drug cartels operating within there. Today they come out and say they're seriously looking at legalizing all drugs in Mexico. Now, if they do that, obviously it's going to have a tremendous impact on the incoming amount of drugs into the United States. What is the president's position on that, and are they going to do anything to stop that from happening in Mexico?
Certainly, we're going to continue engaging with our Mexican partners. I don't have a specific policy announcement on that front. However, I can say that we would not support the legalization of all drugs anywhere, and certainly wouldn't want to do anything that would allow more drugs to come into this country. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Sarah, what's the administration doing about foreign disinformation and use of social media to swing elections?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hope everyone's doing well. Let me start out with a couple of announcements this afternoon. By the way, it's a little chilly in here. You see that?
Notice.
No, I see you all have your blankets on and everything. Okay, first I'd like to start off talking about Nicaragua. And yesterday, the Ortega government sent police and government-aligned arms groups to the town of Masaya in a deadly attack on its own citizens. Reports suggest that at least 3 people have been killed and dozens have been wounded. The Ortega government's brutal campaign of violence against their own people must stop immediately. Yesterday's assault on Masaya is another glaring example of Ortega's efforts to cling to power no matter the cost to the people of Nicaragua. Since April, attacks on university students, journalists, clergy have killed hundreds, and the international community is uniting in its condemnation of the heinous act. We welcome recent statements by the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and well over a dozen countries condemning the government-sponsored violence. We urge others to join the international call for peace. We continue to support the Episcopal Conference of Nicaragua's efforts to advance negotiations to resolve the current conflict, restore respect for human rights, and achieve a better, more democratic future for all Nicaraguans. We appreciate the Church's critical role as a mediator. However, we are concerned that those officials seeking to bring an end to the crisis are coming under physical and reputational attack by the Ortega government and its supporters. The path to peace for the Ortega government remains through early, free, fair, and transparent elections. We urge the Ortega government to take concrete actions now and to negotiate in good faith. Next, I'd like to mention that today USAID Administrator Mark Green is wrapping up his visit to Colombia, and that's where he met with President Santos and President-elect Duque, as well as members of the Colombian Congress, to reaffirm our strong partnership with the people and the government of Colombia. Administrator Green also visited the Colombia-Venezuela border during his trip to the region to meet with some of the more than 2 million Venezuelans who fled the crisis in their home country, which was created by the Maduro regime. While there, Administrator Green announced an additional $6 million in U.S. funding to provide food and health assistance to the thousands of Venezuelan migrants crossing the border every day, and for the Colombian communities that are hosting them. Lastly, I'd like to announce that Secretary Pompeo will travel to New York on Friday, July the 20th, to meet with Ambassador Nikki Haley and members of the United Nations Security Council, the Republic of Korea Foreign Minister Kang, and Japanese Ambassador to the United Nations Koro Bishibo, to discuss the latest on North Korea. The Secretary will also meet with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to discuss a range of issues, including preparations for the UN General Assembly High-Level Week in September and also UN reform. The Secretary will then travel to Simi Valley, California on Sunday, July the 22nd to deliver remarks on supporting Iranian voices at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Center for Public Affairs as part of his visit with members of the Iranian American community in the United States. Secretary Pompeo will travel to from Simi Valley to Palo Alto, California, where he and Secretary of Defense James Mattis will host the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs Julie Bishop and also the Minister for Defense Maurice Payne for this year's Australia-U.S. Ministerial Consultations, otherwise known as OSMAN. That takes place at the Hoover Institution at Stanford on July 23rd and 24th. This OSMAN celebrates 100 years of mateship. It marks the U.S. and Australian forces fighting side by side in a battle for the first time. It's been 100 years.
I think you have to say mateship with an Australian accent.
I don't think I could pull that off very well. That dialogue will focus on deepening our strategic alliance and developing initiatives to promote our shared vision of peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. The United States and Australia have held strategic talks annually since 1985. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Heather. I want to start with some stuff that comes out of Helsinki. I'll be really quick because I think there'll probably be a lot about it. I wanted to ask you a broad question first, but since this question came up at the White House briefing just now, and your colleague over there gave a rather unusual answer to when she was asked about whether or not the administration would support or would help Russian investigators interview former American officials or American citizens in general, but also former American officials, including a former ambassador to Russia. She said that this is something the president was going to take under advisement to talk about with his team. Why is this just not simply is this just not a non-starter to begin with?
Well,
why are you even considering it?
I can't answer on behalf of the White House with regard to that, but what I can tell you is that the overall assertions that have come out of the Russian government are absolutely absurd. The fact that they want to question 11 American citizens and the assertions that the Russian government is making about those American citizens, we do not stand by those assertions that the Russian government makes. The prosecutor general in Russia is well aware that the United States has rejected Russian allegations in this regard. Those have been refuted by, among other things, the Southern District Court of New York in other cases that are somewhat related. Instead, we continue to urge Russian authorities to work with the U.S. Department of Justice to pursue those in Russia who, in fact, perpetrated the fraudulent scheme that Russia refers to. That targeted not only Mr. Browder, but also his company and others, and also the Russian people as a whole.
So does that mean that, that at least speaking for the State Department, that you would object to, oppose, and not allow or not grant a Russian request or demand to interview a former ambassador, someone who used to work for this building?
And I believe some of that would fall under the Department of Justice. So I'd have to loop in the Department of Justice on this. This is something that just came out.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to see the entire White House briefing a short while ago, so I will just tell you that Russian assertions are absolutely absurd at this point.
Well, I get that, but I mean, is this something that's just out of the question that you're not going to allow? Because her response has frankly caused a great deal of concern, not just among members of the previous administration, but among
Matt,
former officials going
what
back.
I provided you right now is
for
all that I have for you on this, but I will be sure to look into
Right.
it and understand that it would be a grave concern to our former colleagues here.
Secondly, the Russian government has spoken several times over the course since Helsinki about how it's ready to implement the agreements, quote unquote, that the two presidents reached in Helsinki. As far as I can tell, there weren't any agreements, and no one seems to know exactly what they are, other than in very broad terms, like agreeing to assist with North Korean denuclearization.
And I think broad is the correct term to use
so
here.
there were no specific agreements
There were
reached.
sort of three takeaways from the meeting, three proposals that we are currently assessing. Again, we're still digging into the details. I know some of you have had a lot of questions about it, understandably so. It's a little too fresh to be able to provide all the details. Among the things that were proposed, a high-level working group with business leaders from both countries. That's one of the things. Another thing that's been proposed is convening some sort of an expert council, which would include political scientists from the United States and from Russia, diplomats, former military officials. The U.S. and the USSR many years ago did something very similar to this. So it's not entirely a new concept, but it's just something that was proposed. Also, another proposal was that our NSC meet with the Russian NSC to discuss follow-up meetings. Anything on that, I'd have to refer you to our NSC for questions about that. You know, these are certainly all modest proposals. The president had said going into this that we wouldn't solve all the world's problems in one meeting and with the Russian government, but we think it's a pretty good place to start.
He was right about that. But with these aren't even agreements yet. They're just proposals.
They are proposals, yes.
And then lastly, on this whole this MH17 question, does the U.S. government still stand by its previous statements and positions that in support of the Dutch investigation team that held that Russia was responsible?
We certainly do. The United States government has long said that Russia is without a doubt responsible for shooting down MH17. As recently as May, we put out 2 statements, and I'd like to read a bit from those statements. The first one came out on May the 24th. It said, the United States has complete confidence in the findings of the Joint Investigation Team as presented today by the Dutch public prosecutor. The missile launcher used to shoot down Malaysia Airline flight MH17 originated from the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Brigade of the Russian Federation stationed in Kursk. It goes on to say MH17 was shot down by Russian-made surface-to-air missile fired from the territory in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russia and Russian-led forces. That was May 24th. May 25th, we put out another statement that said we strongly support decisions by the Netherlands and Australia to call Russia to account for its role in the July 2014 downing of the Malaysia flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine and the horrific deaths of 298 civilians. It's time for Russia to acknowledge its role in shooting down the plane and cease its callous disinformation campaign.
So why
we stand by those statements.
So why no statement yesterday?
Well, we joined, and perhaps some of you haven't seen it, but we joined our G7 colleagues and put out a foreign minister's statement. I believe it was Monday of this week, and I can read for you a bit of that statement. It says, among other things, we, the G7 foreign ministers, Canada, France, Germany, etc., along with the European Union, are united in condemnation for the strongest possible terms of the downing of Malaysia Air Flight MH17, a civilian aircraft flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, July 17, 2014. It goes on to say, and I'm skipping down a few paragraphs, in a rules-based international order, those responsible for unacceptable actions, such as the firing or launching of a missile of Russian origin which intercepted and downed a civilian aircraft, must be held accountable. To this end, we call on Russia to immediately engage with Australia and the Netherlands in good faith and to address all relevant questions regarding any potential breaches of international law. We once again express our deepest condolences to the family and the victims of that flight. Our position on Russian culpability for this has not changed. Our policy on this has not changed.
I'm aware of that statement, and I'm aware of what you just said, but why no statement from either you or the secretary yesterday on the anniversary?
Matt, we have put out 3 statements in 2.5 months, and we think that that covered it. We preferred to go with the G7 statement, and I hope the decision that the United States made this time to go with the G7 statement doesn't cloud anyone's judgment about our steadfast conviction that Russia stands responsible for the shoot down of MH17, and we stand behind the Dutch investigation.
Okay, but it's just that, you guys put out statements on anniversary. I've counted 14 that have been issued this year. Srebrenica, Tiananmen Square, death of an OSCE, an American working for the OSCE, the Good Friday Agreement, Rwandan genocide, any number of things. The secretary puts out a National Day statement a day, basically. 18, there's been 18 days in July, there have been 18 so far. I mean, countries like the Comoros, Solomon Islands, Maldives. I just don't understand why, for the first time in 4 years, since, why is it less of a priority?
You seem to think there's something nefarious going
on
here. I've just pointed to 3 statements that we put out on this, and I want to just say it one more time again.
People notice
before
when things don't happen.
I get it. People seem to notice things. Let me just underscore one more time. The United States holds Russia responsible for the shoot down of MH17, and let me leave it at that. Okay. Leslie.
Given the whole drama that's gone on after the president's visit to Helsinki, a lot of the allies, U.S. allies, have believed that that the secretary should have said something about it afterwards. Specifically,
that the secretary
should have reacted afterwards to placate the allies over concerns they have with what the president said. What was the secretary's view of the
Let me just pause you right there and address that. I think what you're referring to is the secretary held a bilateral meeting after the president's press conference. Is that what you're referring to? And after the bilateral meeting, a few reporters shouted questions. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm not referring to that.
Okay.
I'm just saying,
I'm
asking,
you think that the secretary should have spoken earlier?
I'm asking whether, what was the secretary's feelings about what the president said? Does he believe that that there was damage done to allies?
Well, it's what's interesting about that is many folks in the Beltway seem to think that our phones have been ringing off the hook from diplomats around the world calling to complain. No, that is not the case that we are seeing here. The secretary stands by his previous statements, as does the president, that Russia did indeed meddle in the 2016 election. The secretary has made that clear many times before in congressional testimony and in interviews with many of you as well. The president indicated that very same thing yesterday, the day before, and I believe earlier today. The secretary spoke at the cabinet meeting earlier today. I have a few quotes from you I can certainly read to you in case some of you missed that. The secretary also has full confidence in U.S. intelligence agencies. That is the very same thing that the president said. They both stand by their confidence in U.S. intelligence agencies. Our policy and our overall positions have not changed, and we will continue to hold Russia responsible for its malign activities.
Senator Corker has invited the secretary, asked the secretary to come and testify on Russia next week. Has he agreed to do that?
So the secretary and members of Congress have, for a few weeks now, been going back and forth to find a time that works for all of them for the secretary to brief on North Korea. There was a tentative date, I believe it was a few weeks ago, and that had to be pushed. This is, in fact, that meeting. Our legislative affairs team has been working with the Hill to try to find a date that works for both. So that is the general topic for the conversation. The secretary will also read out his most recent trip, or actually 2 trips ago, I should say, because we've been around a lot of places, in which he went to, obviously, North Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Afghanistan, United Arab Emirates, and then we ended up in Brussels. So the secretary will read out his conversations regarding all of those trips. I imagine, as Senator Corker and others are interested in asking about Russia, the secretary would certainly be happy to answer their questions. Okay? Yeah. Hi, Nick.
There was a lot of frustration in the Senate. Senator Corker said it had been a, quote, pain in the backside in getting the secretary and other senior State Department officials up to testify. Do you have any response to that?
I guess I would just say the secretary's had a really busy schedule. I haven't briefed here recently. That's because I've been on the road along with the secretary. And if I think my schedule is busy, his is really something else. So he's been gone a lot. Every minute of the day, as I look at that schedule, this guy is working. He's working hard, whether he's on the phone or he's traveling or conducting meetings. There's a lot going on. So we've been working hard to try to find a mutually exclusive time to brief Capitol Hill, and I know Secretary Pompeo looks forward to doing that.
That Wednesday date has not yet been confirmed. They said Wednesday at 2:30.
I don't have a specific time for that, but I can double check and get back to you on that.
Just one quick, can I just have one quick follow-up on Russia? So when you said these were proposals that had been discussed, these 3 proposals, Vladimir Putin characterized them as agreements.
I'm sure he did. And that is something that certain governments will do sometimes, where there will be something that's under discussion and a government says that it is an agreement. Those are proposals, then we will certainly take a look at that. Okay? Hi, Barbara. Yeah, for sure.
Just in terms of what Mr. Pompeo said today about the remains of the American service people coming back in the next couple of weeks, we know that there are going to be forensic tests when the remains are returned, but what do you know about the nationalities of those remains already? Are you quite certain they are Americans?
Barbara, I don't have an answer for you on that. I can tell you we had 2 meetings this week. One was on Sunday, the 15th. Sorry, I'm going to get off on my dates here. Right? Sunday was the 15th? Monday was the 15th. Monday and Tuesday, in which the United States had meetings with the North Koreans. And so those conversations continue. There's a lot of work that is left to be done on a lot of different levels, and I'll let you know when we have something more.
And then just a quick question about his meeting on, or his speech on Sunday addressing Iranian Americans. In a previous notice, you mentioned that he would be meeting with members of the Iranian American community, and I didn't see that on the latest notice that went out. Is that still happening? And if it is, who's organizing that? Is the State Department organizing that?
Well, I can tell you the Secretary is giving his speech. I haven't looked at the full travel schedule just yet. I know that there are some members of the Iranian American community who will be at that speech. Perhaps that's what you're referring to, but I just have to go back and take a closer look at the schedule. I don't have an answer for you on that. We will be holding a background call at some point tomorrow, Thursday, and so we'll be able to get you some more information about the specifics of that trip. Okay. Hi.
On the denuclearization of North Korea, the president yesterday said now there is no rush, there is no time limit for the denuke, which seems to be different from what was said before and just after Singapore.
Well,
when,
we have not put timelines on this.
Yes,
You know
but,
that. We've been very
but
clear about not projecting
Secretary
any
Pompeo
timelines.
said it had to happen without delay before the summit,
We
and
have
after
said-
that they said that it will happen quite quickly, very quickly.
We
and
have
it-
said there's a lot of work left to be done. The conversations continue. I'm not going to get ahead of those conversations, and I'm not going to be able to read out every single conversation that we have on this matter. But we're working on it. We have teams in place that are working very hard on this issue every day.
And just a quick one on NATO after the summit and after Helsinki. There were some criticism about some comments the president made about Montenegro, called a very tiny little country with very aggressive people. The fact that the US could defend NATO allies in case of an attack.
Yeah,
So
I would have to refer you to the White House to comment on the president's comments about Montenegro. I can tell you that the president reiterated our ironclad commitment to NATO's collective defense last week. The summit declaration that came out at the end of the summit stated clearly that any attack against one ally will be regarded as an attack against all, as set out in Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. But beyond that, I'd have to refer you over to the White House.
He also said in his interview last night that, you know, that Montenegrins are aggressive and they could cause World War III. What are the allies supposed to make of comments like that?
Matt,
I mean,
to my
is this
awareness,
an attempt at a bad,
to
or a
my
bad
awareness,
attempt at a joke?
we have not received any calls on this issue.
Do you remember how many Montenegrins, if any, troops were at Bagram when the secretary visited the coalition
I
forces
don't
there?
recall there being Polish troops there,
Pol-
and we
no,
thank them for
Montenegrin.
savers.
Do you know if there were any Montenegrins?
I'm not aware of
Okay.
that. I
And
know
then
there
just-
were Polish forces there.
and then just-
and let me just say, while we're talking about it, thank you for your contribution.
Just the last thing, in terms of the Hill, there's some leading Democrats are demanding that the interpreter from the State Department, who was the translator for President Trump in Helsinki, testify. It's my understanding that that's pretty much an unprecedented request, and that hasn't ever happened before. Do you guys have a position on
Yeah,
whether staff should be hauled in
and
to testify?
and that's the
before?
question that I asked. Is there any precedent for this? We've not been able to find that just yet. I can tell you there's no formal request to have the interpreter appear before any congressional committees at this point. Overall, as a general matter, we always seek to work with Congress, and that's all I have on this. Okay. All right. Hey, Rich.
Thanks. Was the secretary involved in urging the president to make his statement yesterday, or
He was not.
He was not.
He was not. There were reports that he was. Those were inaccurate reports. That was the president's decision and his team's decision to go out. The secretary did not weigh in with the president on that matter.
And really quickly on the trip to the United Nations, is there any room in the schedule or any potential for a meeting with any North Korean officials while the secretary's there?
I will be up there with the secretary. I'll be the first to tell you if there are any North Koreans. It was the president. It was the president's decision. I know that the secretary met with the vice president at the over at the White House compound overall earlier this week, and that's it.
But he didn't feel the need to talk
Matt,
to
I
the
wouldn't read
president
too much into this. I think the president has a ample staff that he consults with regularly, plenty of people, and he made that decision on his own. I'd refer you back to the White House. I think Sarah Sanders covered that one well. Hey, Lori.
Yeah, hi. The UN has responded to the protests in Iraq by calling on the government to fully respect and address the people's legitimate concerns. What's your comment on those protests?
I'm sorry, the overall protests, you mean about the electricity and all the...
And the corruption is a big part of it.
Right. Overall, I can just tell you we support people's rights to peacefully protest. We certainly understand when there are electricity shortages, when there are oil shortages and things of the sort, that is something that would be certainly upsetting to people. The Iraqi government has said that it safeguards the right of its citizens to protest. They also have the right to maintain the security of public and private property in Iraq. They've expressed an intent to do more to address protesters' grievances, including the lack of services of electricity and also economic opportunity. Overall, though, this would be an internal Iraqi matter of this.
Corruption is a big part of the problem. Is the embassy there prepared to help the Iraqi government deal with its corruption issue, find ways to improve that situation?
We have a excellent relationship with the government of Iraq. We are in constant contact with areas that we may have concerns about. Some of that, Lori, would be covered under a private diplomatic conversation, so I'm not going to get into that. But I can just tell you we have a lot of conversations with the government of Iraq.
And if I could ask you a question about Turkey today, that the Turkish court rejected Pastor Andrew Brunson's appeal to be released from prison. What's your response to that?
I can tell you we have obviously been very closely engaged in Pastor Brunson's case and with the Turkish government on that case in particular. We've not seen any credible evidence against Pastor Brunson that he's guilty of the crimes that the Turkish government accuses him of. The case against him is built on anonymous sources, and accusations and a lot of speculation. It's a concern of ours. We believe that he's innocent. We continue to call on the Turkish government to quickly resolve his case in a timely and transparent and fair manner. I can tell you that our chargé, Phil Knesset, was, as well as other U.S. Embassy officials, were present at the proceedings on the 18th for Pastor Brunson. If we have anything more for you, we'll certainly let you know.
So you're not calling for him to be, for his release?
Well, we always called for the pastor's release. We would certainly like that to happen.
Well, I mean, listen, at the NATO summit just last week, the president of the United States fist bumped President Erdogan and said, keep up the good work and all this kind of thing. How is this?
Matt, I'm not going to be able to answer for everything that whether it's the president or whether it's Secretary Mattis or somebody else, I'm not going to be able to answer for that.
I just wonder if that plays into the right kind of kid gloves treatment that you're giving to the Turks right now. Previous statements.
I don't think so, Matt. We have followed this case extremely closely. Yeah. Members of Congress are also following this closely. I can tell you it's something that the Secretary cares deeply about, especially one's religious freedom. We do have a religious freedom ministerial that's coming up next week that is important to the Secretary. This is something we are actively involved with and care deeply about. You may not see all the actions, activities, conversations that the United States government is having on behalf of American citizens, so I'm not going to be able to say anything more to you on that. Okay? And last question. Abby, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
There have been reports out over the Taliban. Do you have a response to that? Is that what the U.S. is doing?
Yeah. Abby, I can just tell you that we're exploring all avenues to advance a peace process in close consultation with the government of Afghanistan. Our position on this hasn't changed. Any peace and reconciliation talks have to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. We stand by that position, and that is something that we've not backed away from.
So the U.S. would not engage in direct talks.
Abby, that's all I'm going to say to you right now. We're exploring all avenues to advance a peace process, but that peace process has to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. That's very important in order to make it a long-term success. Okay. Elise, and then we got to go. Last question. Hey.
Sorry, I had to run out for live shot. Can you? Already made sure that no one asked.
Okay.
Can you please fill us in on the kind of phone calls and meetings that the Secretary has said to do follow up on the NATO summit or provide allies any kind of readout of what happened this week in Helsinki?
I can tell you that there was a readout provided with Ambassador Huntsman and Ambassador Hutchison from the NATO summit. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any particular high-level calls or engagements that we've had. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we gotta leave it there. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
She never said that phrase. She just leaned over and she's talking to one guy, and when she was actually the question, she stood back up and she right on the plus every time, so I just didn't touch it.
Maybe I'd have to see exactly what you're saying. I mean, because they typically don't just
exactly. That's what they do. That's exactly what she did. So she would just lean over, I had the plus right on her, and in the middle, and then she would like get up and move around. I saw him moving it a little bit when she was like moving around. So I have like I'm practicing camera work. I had her like right on the plus in my viewfinder, but then like sometimes she would get like a little off as she leaned to like the left or the right. Do you move your camera at all when she?
Depends on how much she moves. I mean, if she moves a lot, yeah, I move. It's just a minor move, and you know she's going to go right back to center.
Yeah. What did you do this time around? Sorry, you just happened to be here. Did you try to stay on her at any point, or did you just mostly keep it in the center?
Yeah, I mean, if she leans a whole lot, then I move with her.